The Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police Service, Cressida Dick, gave evidence to the Police and Crime Committee on the violence which is blighting our city and what the Met is doing to stem the tide of crime. This will feed into the committee's ongoing investigation on tackling the rise of violent crime in London. Finally, I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge Brian Oakerby's 16 years of dedicated service to the GLA. As Senior Events Officer, he was instrumental in establishing and maintaining the high quality of events across the GLA and played a significant role in community cultural festivals. The 2012 Olympics and Paralympics, the Holocaust Memorial and the New York celebrations. I beg your pardon, the New Year celebrations, but we celebrate New York here as well. We're a very broad church. Mr. Oakerby has been a passionate advocate for deaf and disabled artists, and it was the Deputy Chair's pleasure to make a small presentation to him on our behalf at his leaving function. We wish him all the best in his retirement. Declarations of interest. May I ask the Assembly to note the recommendation set out in item 2? Thank you very much. May I ask Assembly members to declare any other disclosable pecuniary interests or other relevant interests where they relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting? Thank you. In relation to that, I can confirm that the dispensation awarded to all members by the Monitoring Officer in 2017 means that whilst they have a disclosable pecuniary interest in the issue at agenda item 7, they are all properly able to take a decision on matters relating to their remuneration under that item on the agenda for today's meeting. Minutes. Can I ask the Assembly to agree the minutes of the London Assembly Mayor's Question Time meeting held on the 21st of June 2018 to be signed by me as a correct record? Right, thank you very much. Can I ask you to formally receive the Mayor's report covering the period from the 8th of June 2018 to the 5th of July 2018? Thank you. The Mayor, we've got you finally, Mr. Mayor. The Mayor will now provide an oral update of up to 5 minutes in length on matters occurring since the publication of his report. Assembly members have submitted 2 requests for topics for inclusion within the update. Mr. Mayor.
Good morning. This week the news has been dominated by Brexit yet again, an issue that could have profound consequences for the lives of millions of Londoners. Since the day after the EU referendum, I have been working to ensure that London's voice is heard and to fight for a Brexit deal that's in the best interest of all Londoners. And that's what I will continue to do. Last week I wrote to the Prime Minister to warn her that the government's white paper completely fails to meet the needs of our leading service sectors, which represent 92% of our economy in London, a concern shared by many business leaders in London and across our country. There's no doubt that the kind of hard Brexit the government's now proposing would throw up new regulatory barriers that would damage the ability of our world-leading creative, tech and financial services to do business across the EU. This would cause huge economic harm with repercussions for not just here in London, but across the country. But worse still, with the division and disarray within the government and the Prime Minister capitulating once again to the hard Brexiteers in her party, it's clearer than ever before there's a grave risk that we could crash out of the EU with no deal at all. This is the worst possible scenario, one that independent experts predict could lead to nearly 90,000 fewer jobs in our city. That's why I've instructed officials here at City Hall to step up preparations for such a devastating no-deal situation. I urge the Prime Minister to start putting the national interest ahead of her own interests and her country ahead of her party. We're now running out of time. The government needs to change course and quickly and accept that staying within the single market and the customs union is the best way to protect jobs and growth across the UK. Since we last met, I've also been working on a number of strategies and initiatives to improve the lives of Londoners. This includes continuing to do everything possible to tackle violent crime, not only by cracking down on violent crime, but the root causes of violent crime too. I've also continued to lobby ministers for the extra resources we need to help keep our cities safe. Chair, I've been asked for 2 oral updates. The first one's on the Brexit white paper from Assembly Member Dismal. I wrote to the Prime Minister last week warning that her white paper completely fails to meet the needs of our leading service sectors, a concern shared by many London and UK business leaders. This kind of hard Brexit will throw up new regulatory barriers which will damage the ability of our world-leading creative, tech, professional and financial services to do business across the EU, putting jobs at risk across the country. 92% of London's economy is service-based, and the strength of these businesses is seen beyond the capital. The financial and professional services industries alone employ over 2.2 million people across the country, only a third of whom are based in London. Trade in services accounts for roughly 40% of UK exports to the EU and includes our world-leading financial services, accountants and lawyers. It was my intention to respond more fully to the white paper taken on board the advice of my Brexit advisory panel. However, given the Prime Minister's capitulation to her hard Brexiteers, it's looking increasingly unclear whether there will be a white paper to respond to. It's already clear that the kind of Brexit the government's currently offering is untested, complex, expensive, and will take years to fully implement. Even if the EU were to agree with the deal being proposed, due to the exclusion of services, there is a very real risk that jobs and investment that could have been ours might go elsewhere in Europe. And now with the Prime Minister having accepted amendments to the customs bill proposed by hardline Brexiteers, it is clearer than ever we're at grave risk of crashing out of the EU with no deal, a situation that would cost nearly 90,000 jobs in London and nearly 500,000 across the UK, according to independent analysis we commissioned from Cambridge Econometrics. This is now all at risk. That's why I met the Prime Minister last Friday. I urged her, for the good of the economy and thousands of people's jobs, to change course and seek a deal that keeps us in the single market and customs union. And the second request, Chair, for an urgent oral update was from Assembly Member Pigeon. It's on Oxford Street. I wrote to the leader of Westminster on the 3rd of July and stated my disappointment at Westminster's unilateral decision to walk away from 2 years of joint work to transform Oxford Street and the surrounding district. Westminster are the highway and planning authority for Oxford Street, and is now incumbent on them to prepare an alternative plan that adequately addresses the known challenges to the area, including poor air quality, road safety, pedestrian crowding, and a poor public realm. Failure to address these issues comprehensively and holistically will undermine the future economic success of London's West End offer. The success of Oxford Street is important not only to the economic prosperity of London, but also to the UK economy as a whole. The Council has now set out its intention to bring forward some initial pedestrianisation safety changes to be delivered later this year, followed by a wider piece of work on the Oxford Street district. This timetable indicated Westminster will provide information on the safety scheme next month. I expect them to stick to this timeline and have also requested an update on the district-wide scheme by September. When I have seen these proposals and assessed how they address the challenges in the area, I'll make a decision on TfL and the GLA's next steps for this project. We're doing our part and have already reduced the number of buses that use Oxford Street by 40% and continue to do what we can to reduce this further. Now it's up to the Council to step up and tell us how it proposes to make Oxford Street fit for a world-leading 21st century city. It's worth reminding Assembly members that pedestrianised Oxford Street was a manifesto commitment also made by the Lib Dems and the Conservatives. Thank you. I look forward to answering questions during the course of this morning.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Devonish.
Mr Mayor, good morning. I know we've had some ill-tempered discussions recently on Oxford Street on other issues, but are you aware that your officers have agreed funding has been pulled of £23.5 million for one of the most deprived wards in London, namely Church Street, for a redevelopment project? The reason given, Mr Mayor, is we haven't held a ballot. We have held a ballot for that scheme. Would you please relook at this? This is hitting the most vulnerable people. We may disagree on Oxford Street, we may disagree on CCTV, but this is about the most vulnerable people on a housing scheme that will actually increase by 406 homes net affordable housing in the City of Westminster.
Chair, the question must be in order because you've allowed it. I'm not sure what it's got to do with Oxford Street or Brexit.
A suggestion that this was in retaliation for Westminster City Council's policy on Oxford Street.
That's not what you said.
I'm not very good at
What
being
we are
diplomatic.
looking for is the money that was agreed.
Can I just say, I'm asking for a ruling. Is there a new way that we're doing these updates, and anyone could chip in with any extra questions that they like? Because if that's what the policy is going to be, that's fine.
No,
I agree with the Assembly member asking his question, but we'll be ready and waiting for that to introduce that.
No, that isn't the policy. Assemblymember Devonish did tell me beforehand that he was going to link this, as I've already mentioned to the Mayor, with his policy on Oxford Street.
Well, I thought I tried to, but if I didn't do that, I apologise.
That in his question. Anyway, that's why it's in order. I mean, you could simply say it's not, and that's the end of it.
Chair,
Yes.
I don't wish to challenge the Chair, but yeah. I'm not sure that the way that you've worked this out between you beforehand or not is the right way on the mayoral update. I think the Mayor can handle himself, and I hope he answers it quickly. But it's just not the way that the updates are meant to be done. If we're going to have a new way of these updates, I don't mind, Chair, but let's have a discussion around that we all are treated equally about this, because I don't think this question or the way that it's been phrased is correct, to be honest, and I think it goes against our procedures.
Well, indeed. But of course, any member can speak to me beforehand as to how the meeting is discussed. You know, I'm completely even-handed as far as that is concerned.
It's about our procedures and rules, and you're the guardian of those procedures and rules. And I think in this case, I think your ruling is wrong. I would beg you to either take advice from officers. Look, I stand to be corrected, but I don't think this is the right way to raise that question at this current rules, unless you change them. Sorry.
Yes. In this particular case, given the way that the question was phrased, there is no appropriate linkage, and therefore the question falls. But I've no doubt that Assemblymember Devonish will think of some subtle way of raising the matter later. Assemblymember Dismore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your statement on the white paper. Coincidentally, just a few days after the Chequers so-called agreement, the Economy Committee at City Hall held evidence hearing on Brexit and its impact on London, and all the experts from whichever side of the debate they came agreed that this wasn't a comprehensive plan we need to protect the capital's economy and Londoners' jobs, and there wasn't a hope that Brussels would accept it anyway. And I think you do agree that after the white paper wrangling this week and the deadlock in Parliament, with the Prime Minister enthralled to the Conservative Party's Brexiteer extremists, the economic health of London is very much at risk. Isn't the time coming for the people's vote, a second referendum on the final deal, if there is one, and with an option to remain, then we can all make a properly informed choice, hopefully without fake news, without broken campaign spending limits, and without Russian or President Trump's involvement?
Well, look, I think the Secretary of State, the new Secretary of State, is going to Brussels today, and we wish Dominic Raab well in his meeting with Michael Barnier and his team. I think you're right to remind us that a negotiation involves two sides. And even assuming that the government were able to achieve all her objectives with the white paper, it would still be catastrophic for London's economy. As I said in my answer, 92% of our economy is the service sector. Think of finance, think of insurance, think of legal, think of accountancy. And so I can understand the concern about the consequences on our city. In relation to the people's referendum point you raised in part of your question, I've been quite clear since the day after the referendum result. I'm devastated that our country's voted to leave the European Union. I'm incredibly proud that London voted to remain, the one region in our country that voted, in England, that voted to remain. But I've also said if it's the case that the UK Parliament, which is sovereign, rejects the deal the government secures with the European Union in October, then everything is back on the table. That includes the possibility of a referendum, but it also includes the possibility of a general election. The reality is the Brexiteers can't have it both ways. On the one hand, they claim Parliament is sovereign. On the other hand, if Parliament rejects the EU deal made by the government, they're scared about a referendum or a general election. They're also scared, by the way, of Parliament's vote. And so it's for them to answer what happens if Parliament rejects the EU deal.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. We're now going to the questions which are... Oh, I'm sorry. Assemblymember Pidgeon.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your answer. I share your frustration with Westminster City Council, and obviously they had a cabinet meeting on Monday evening. I'm wondering, have you spoken to Councillor Nicky Aitken, the leader of Westminster Council, since they rejected these joint proposals since this cabinet meeting?
I've written to the leader and she's responded to me. You'll appreciate, so remember that in light of the hard work and conversations we've had over 2 years, there is a certain feeling amongst TfL, City Hall and myself about the lack of goodwill on their part. And so you'll appreciate my reluctance to meet because, frankly speaking, it's clear from the evidence we have over 2 years, you can't put much weight on what politicians or officers say to us from that council. And that's why I'm very angry and frustrated. We've wasted, just to give you an idea, it looks like we've wasted £8 million of taxpayers' money. There have been dozens and dozens and dozens of meetings with the council and with officers, including with stakeholders. And so you'll appreciate we're now doing things through correspondence. I've written to the leader. I think she's responded to me, and I'll be dealing with her letter soon. But the ball's in their court now. They have said they're going to come up with plans that are better than the plans we spent 2 years working together on, that had the support of the vast majority of Londoners. And let's wait and see what they do.
Have you seen or discussed at all their new sort of limited plans for changing Oxford Street, which were outlined in this cabinet report? You know, have you looked at any of that yet?
TfL officials are going through them now. You'll appreciate the objectives that we had, and we spent many hustings talking about this, but you'll appreciate the concerns there are not in relation to crowding, not in relation to public realm, not in relation to air quality. The additional concern we now know about vehicle mitigation duties there are, but also we all know that once the Elizabeth line opens, there'll be additional people coming to that part of London. And the question that the council's got to answer is not just addressing those concerns, but what's the future of retail in the 21st century for Oxford Street when you've got internet shopping, but also shopping malls that are attractive for customers? And that's why it's frustrating that the council doesn't appreciate this is important not just for London, but the entire UK economy.
You said you're expecting a full update by September, and you're then going to look at that and make a decision. Have you looked at your powers under the GLA Act to either take over Oxford Street as a strategic road or to actually direct the borough in order for Westminster to meet the requirements of your transport strategy? Because it's very clear in your strategy, you specifically state that you will transform the experience of walking and cycling in central London by transforming Oxford Street. So if Westminster's new plans don't transform Oxford Street, could you use your powers on this strategically important road?
Well, can I thank you for the motion that you moved and was passed by the Assembly, which deals, I beg your pardon,
The other Caroline,
the other Caroline, something about Russell moved and was passed by the Assembly. Apologies, Caroline. But I think, the best way to answer that, bearing in mind it's only fair to wait for the Council's response, is that we'll consider all options.
Okay, thank you for that. And then Street is currently having its annual traffic-free summer streets for the 6th consecutive year. What are your plans for Oxford Street to have similar events?
Well, later on there's a question about car-free streets. Well, the problem is it needs the partnership and cooperation of the council to do these things. The retailers on Regent Street plus the Crown Estate have worked collegiately with the council, and the council deserve credit for during the month of July, the four days during July where they close the street off. It's fantastic. You've been there. You've seen how great it is, the ambience, the atmosphere it creates and stuff. And that's why it's surprising at this U-turn from the council. But let's wait and see what the council does.
But in your manifesto, though, you specifically said you're going to bring back car-free days, possibly weekends, before moving towards full pedestrianisation. And for many years, Oxford Street was pedestrianised in the run-up to Christmas. For at least one day, they had these very important pedestrian days. They were really successful, brought tens of thousands more people into Oxford Street. Will you do everything you can to see if you could get a traffic-free day on Oxford Street before Christmas?
And you'll know we've managed to achieve some traffic-free areas in that part of London during Lumiere.
Yeah.
And so it can be done where there's a willingness on all sides to make it work. We're keen to do so. The good news is actually it's easier now because there are fewer buses. Yeah. And so the diversions are fewer. And so we'd like to do so.
Do you try and get one before Christmas?
Yeah, but to be fair, let's wait and see the council response to the pedestrianisation, and then hopefully when relations, the feelings we have thaw, we can maybe talk about that sort of stuff. But we're happy to support this. You'll hear an answer to my question later on, the amount of support we're given financially, plus officer time to car-free days, car-free events. It's really important we do so because it gives people the experience that there is a life outside of cars using the busy roads, but sometimes they're being able to pedestrians.
Well, thank you very much. I welcome your answers.
Thank you. Now we go to the questions which have been formally tabled. And the first question was from Assemblymember McCartney, and it relates to serious youth violence.
Thank you, Chair. We're doing everything we can from City Hall to tackle youth violence. But we can't do this alone. We need more help from government. We also need the whole community, including parents and carers, to play their vital part in tackling violent crime. Parents and carers play a crucial role in our response to tackling youth violence, and we must support them in doing this. Throughout the development and now delivery of this strategy, my officials have continued to work with and consult parents, including bereaved parents, to inform our responses to knife crime. This includes hearing from bereaved parents at my knife crime summits and at partnership roundtable discussions. Most recently, parents and carers were actively involved and consulted within the development of my London Needs You Alive toolkit, which I launched last month. The toolkit will be disseminated to community groups, faith groups, and to schools and colleges across London, and provides targeted advice that will support parents and carers in talking to their children about knife crime. It includes a parent's guide to knife crime and a range of resources which have been developed to support parents to work with their children. The toolkit also signposts parents to a number of helplines, including the NSPCC helpline, which provides 24-hour help and support to thousands of parents and families. This information will also be accessible via our London Needs You Alive online hub. I've also recently funded 6 projects via my Knife Crime Community Seed Fund to the value of £158,000, which are aimed at supporting community groups to work with parents and families. Further opportunities for additional support are available via my £45 million youth fund, which I set up to support communities to work with young people at risk of getting caught up in crime.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The reason I ask this is because I've attended a number of local meetings now where people, and parents in particular, have said they don't know where to go and get help. So these resources are really welcome. But how are you going to make sure that they are consistently applied across London? One parent told me she'd looked on her council website and couldn't find any information there and didn't know where to go. So is there a role for councils as well to be highlighting and to be promoting these materials?
No, I think so. I think councils all councils deserve huge credit. We recently had a meeting and invited the council leaders, chief executives, directors of social services, the community safety partnerships from each council, along with senior police, Sophie Linden, the deputy mayor, and myself. And I think every council was represented, which is unprecedented. So I think councils realise no one's immune from this. We're working on having a digital facility available to parents and carers so they can find the nearest community centre, youth club available to them. But also, you're right, there are online facilities we can make available. The toolkit will help, and councils have a role to play. Often, a parent or carer will go to the local council rather than going to another website and stuff. And we've got to make sure councils understand the importance of promoting the toolkit, promoting the helpline, but also providing parents with help they need. You know, as indeed I do, how difficult it is, how challenging it is to raise children in the 21st century with the other distractions there are. That's why parents need the assistance they can get from people like us and positions of power and influence, including councils.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Eshalomi.
Mayor, on this subject, the Commissioner has mentioned that sometimes the police are met with a wall of silence and that they are looking at ways of encouraging people to come forward. But the reality is that it's a two-way street, and when people do come forward sometimes, they feel that they're not getting the help and the assistance. So I cite an example of a young boy that was stabbed in Tulse Hill in 2016. His mum sought help from the local MP, the police and the council, and a range of different partners in terms of them moving. That boy was stabbed again 3 weeks ago, 7 times. Thankfully, he still survived. Is there anything more that MOPAC can do in terms of making sure all the agencies are actually connecting and, more importantly, talking to each other in terms of how to help people?
There's a convening role that we have and we are playing in trying to bring people together. One of my frustrations is the lack of powers we have. So if there was a duty placed on every public authority in relation to theory, you'd have some real change. We had a presentation from Wales recently. We talk about Scotland, but in Wales there is this duty which helps them convene and bring people together. Let me give you an example. So the local authority, we won't use that particular case. The local authority has finite housing. We know of the housing crisis, and often it's very difficult for them to find an alternative place for somebody to be rehoused if they're in danger. We know the police can protect witnesses who are vulnerable, and there are witness protection schemes. But even if you're able to find a property outside of the area to keep that child safe, all the support system that's needed, social services, yachts, other support that an individual may need won't be there unless there's proper joined-up thinking. So it is difficult. And one of the things we've got to do is make it easier for people to come forward. I know, for example, from speaking to officers many times, people won't come forward to assist the police because they're worried about reprisals, but also they feel wrongly they can keep themselves safer than the police can. That's why I'd encourage anybody with any information about a criminal offence, whether you're the victim or a witness, to please report it to the police, and they will do their best to keep you safe in the context of we need other public authorities, the police, youth services, could be the MIJ, it could be social services, it could be the NHS working together.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mayor, we do know that there are common factors which are present in the lives of young people committing serious violence, school exclusions, for instance. Is MOPAC doing anything specifically to develop an understanding of these common factors?
So on exclusions in particular, Sophie Lynn and the Deputy Mayor for Police and Crime met with the head of the academies this week to discuss this issue. You'll be aware, on Mesh, that actually one of the concerns that boroughs have is the lack of accountability with schools in their borough. And so previously, with local management of schools, a borough would know what's happening in different schools and can make sure exclusions were consistent. There was a real concern now in some schools excluding children because it affects exam tables and because it affects other reasons, other factors. And then they go to pupil referral units, but they're not really going to the PRUs, and it can lead to all sorts of other issues. You and I have both met too many people involved in criminality who at some stage were excluded. And so at this week's Serious Violent Crime Task Force meeting chaired by the Home Secretary, I made the point that actually there needs to be a policy around exclusions. Edward Timpson, the former MP, is doing a review in relation to exclusions. I've written to him and due to meet with him to express my concern about exclusions leading to young people not having constructive things to do, which can lead to them getting involved in crimes. That's just one factor. There are other factors as well, as you know.
Indeed. So, just to carry on, Mr. Mayor, the Knife Crime Summit on the 27th of June, MOPEC's head of Insight told us that victims and offenders of violent crime overlap, and that these people have usually come into contact with a range of services before they commit a serious offence. Now, this obviously gives the public sector a number of opportunities to intervene and make a positive difference to that young person's life. How can we make the most of these interactions? What more can be done to turn around the lives of young people that are at risk of committing violent crime?
Well, actually, there's evidence, statistic evidence that shows that a large number of those who are victims of crime sometimes later on get involved in being arrested for criminality and stuff. And so you're right. If we can at an early stage, work with people to turn them around, it makes a big difference. And that's one of the reasons why we've invested this year more money in youth workers, in trauma centres and A&Es. It's that teachable moment. And so we're doing work with St Giles Trust, Red Thread and many others to make sure we help victims to provide them the support and assistance they need. So later on, God forbid, there isn't a reprisal or them getting involved in criminality. The context, though, is that over the last few years, we've seen a huge cut in preventative services, a huge cut in diversionary services from youth work, mental health services, wraparound care, other services that we know local authorities provided, and the third sector provided as well. One of the reasons that I've diverted money from business rates to a new Young Londoners fund is to invest in prevention and diversion, at the same time invest in £140 million in enforcement as well. We've got to focus on all three: enforcement, prevention and diversion as well.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Twycross.
Thank you. School holidays should be a time for enjoyment, for sort of be a pleasant time for young people, and that's what most of us will remember them being, but they clearly present potential risks. Now that we're around the time of school summer holidays in London, what support will be available for children and young people throughout London during this time, and what work is MOPAC and the wider GLA doing to link communities of young people with these services?
So you're actually, past evidence tells us that in July and August, crime has known to increase, and it doesn't take an expert to work out why that is. And actually, when you bear in mind that in recent years, in July and August, the number of activities young people can do has gone down. Mm-hmm. And so what I've done this year is to make sure we accelerate the new money that I've announced, but also make sure the money's being used in those areas where young people haven't got constructive things to do. So the good news is, I can't go into every single example of the facilities we're funding, but there are 1,700 more young people will be involved in sporting activities because of the funding we've announced recently. 950 vulnerable young people, young Londoners, will be participating in summer schools this summer, which they weren't before. 800 young people will be getting assistance from grassroots community projects to tackle violent crime. That's just to give you a vignette of some of the things we're doing. Not enough by itself. Local authorities are frustrated because of the cuts they've had from central government, but they're trying to give them credit to do what they can within limited resources. We've got to make sure we give young people constructive things to do this summer. It's going to be a hot summer, long days. And what we don't want is, because young people haven't got constructive things to do, they get involved in antisocial behaviour or criminality. I'll make this one final point, Fiona, which you know, but the vast majority of young people are law-abiding, peaceful, a credit to themselves, their families and our communities. We're talking about a small number who may get attracted to criminality or antisocial behaviour because they've not got constructive things to do. I'm not excusing criminality, I'm just explaining some of the factors that experts say we need to address, and we're trying to address them this year. The good news is that we think we can build on this year, so next year will be an even better offer because councils will ramp up and help us, and we'll have more money going out the door for the £45 million.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The question on the order paper is from Assembly Member Russell and relates to the Heathrow third runway.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your question. It is disappointing that despite our best efforts, that the National Policy Statement on Heathrow expansion was approved by the House of Commons. I firmly believe this is the wrong approach. As you'll recall, when I appeared before the Assembly last month, I announced that I intended to play a part in a legal challenge to the National Policy Statement, the NPS. I can tell the Assembly this morning that this process is now underway and that a formal pre-application protocol letter has now been submitted to the Government. This sets out the overarching legal grounds of the case and requests key documents. Officers are working closely with their counterparts at the 5 boroughs with whom we are joint claimants, namely Hammersmith and Fulham, Hillingdon, Richmond, Wandsworth and Windsor and Maidenhead. Air quality will be central to the case, noting the dire impact of Heathrow on our legal obligations to address this public health crisis of toxic air. Noise, surface access and climate change will also likely feature. Given the dire noise, air quality and surface access impacts of Heathrow expansion and the failure of the NPS to adequately address these concerns, we believe there is merit in the legal case. I remain committed to opposing such a short-sighted decision which would have dire consequences for the health and quality of life of Londoners.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I'm really proud that we as an Assembly and you, our Mayor, are united in our opposition against a third runway at Heathrow. It would be desperately damaging to the lives of hundreds of thousands of Londoners. Now, after the Commons vote on the third runway on the 25th of June, you tweeted that it was the wrong decision. Do you have a message for the 10 Conservative and 17 Labour London MPs that voted in support of the third runway?
I think they're wrong. And it's not party political, by the way, and it's worth noting, Chair, through you, that the 5 boroughs involved are of different sizes, different political persuasions, and are united in relation to our concerns. But also there's one borough outside of London as well that understands these concerns. And I think they've got it wrong. Look, we all understand the importance of jobs, growth and prosperity. We all understand the importance of London being open to business. Heathrow's not the answer. No one's anti-Heathrow. I suspect those of us who are against the expansion, we're anti-expansion. And that's why it's important for those MPs who, in my view, wrongly believe Heathrow's the answer to reflect upon actually the consequences of runway 3 at Heathrow.
Thank you. Now, I'm really glad in your initial answer that you mentioned that the grounds for the legal case include noise and pollution, but also that you include climate change as one of the grounds of your legal challenge. Will you give climate change as much weight as pollution and noise in the joint legal action? It is one of the strongest arguments.
I just say this, as somebody who used to be a lawyer, doing what your client tells you is not always the best answer in relation to winning a case. So we'll be guided by the legal advice. And what I suspect we'll do, Caroline, is pursue those lines of argument which we have best chance of winning the case on.
Okay, so, but you must be aware that for any airport expansion in the UK to be consistent with our climate change targets, sectors such as transport, building and agriculture need to cut their carbon emissions by at least 80%. But according to the Committee on Climate Change, that's just not happening. Now, I don't know if you're aware of the work of Plan B, who are an environmental charity who are currently taking the government to court because the UK's carbon targets are based on 2 degrees warming and not the 1.5 degrees, which is based on the Paris Climate Agreement. would you meet with Plan B so they can tell you about the significance of climate change in their legal case and the relevance that it may have for your joint legal action with the boroughs?
Chair, I'd be keen for either Shirley or myself to meet with them, yeah, sooner rather than better. I thought you meant the singer.
Yes, sooner rather than later, because you need, yes, that's absolutely fantastic. Now, the other question is about Gatwick expansion, because if Heathrow is not happening, is it really, if we say, you know, Heathrow shouldn't happen, is it really okay to be dumping the noise and pollution on the people living around Gatwick, you know, because they're outside of London?
Well, I think unfortunately Gatwick's off the table. My point in relation to Gatwick is actually that if the argument is, and I think the argument is a good one, that there is a need for increased aviation capacity in this part of the country, in the southeast of England, there is an alternative. It's cheaper. It would happen far quicker. There are nowhere near the air quality and noise pollution concerns there are with Heathrow. I think Heathrow is 2 million people affected by noise pollution. And so there is an alternative there which the government could pursue. They've chosen not to pursue Gatwick and are going for Heathrow. So let's wait and see what happens with that.
But, Mr. Mayor, if we're talking about climate change, you know, the climate change argument against Heathrow, it also applies against Gatwick. Now, your environment strategy says that you will work with other global city leaders through the C40 to support the implementation of the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, people are looking for climate leadership. We've seen record-breaking temperatures in London. We're seeing climate breakdown. We've seen the Wanstead Flats fire, grass fire, really, you know, frightening changes. Will you consider inviting your C40 counterparts to join you in a joint pledge for no more airport expansion and actually using existing airport capacity better?
Well, I spend a lot of time talking to colleagues in C40. As you know, I'm the vice chair of C40. The point about, we mustn't misstate the Heathrow concerns, though. It's not just climate change. It's one of the number of factors: air quality, noise, the surface transport links, the public transport links, and climate change. There are a number of different reasons why there are concerns with Heathrow. But I accept the case that the argument's been made for increasing aviation capacity in the southeast of England. I'm not somebody who says no more increase in relation to aviation capacity anywhere in the world.
Okay, I suspect that's incompatible with the climate change argument, but I'm out of time now, so I'm going to have to leave it there.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Assembly Member Whittle and relates to police clear-up rates.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question. Durham has achieved excellent results given the national reduction in funding and officer numbers, and they should be congratulated. As far as comparisons with London are concerned, I think this should be put into context. London has a population of close to 9 million, while Durham Constabulary serves a population of approximately 620,000, the population of 2 London boroughs. In terms of resources, at the same time the Met has lost 19% of its budget, Durham has lost 9%. The Met, unlike other forces, also has a remit for national functions and responsibilities for which we are underfunded. London has some of the most complex crimes and the largest number of gangs and organised crime networks. London also faces non-crime demand which falls to the police, including mental health and missing persons, where sanction detection is simply not a measure. But I do agree with Chief Constable Mike Barton about good old-fashioned policing. Real neighbourhood policing with officers who know and are known to the community they serve is at the heart of my agenda for safety in London. I've doubled the number of dedicated ward officers working in all of London's 629 wards. There are now at least 2 dedicated police constables and a dedicated police community support officer to help gather intelligence on local issues, detect crime and solve local problems, good old-fashioned policing. Police forces across the country work closely with each other, and the Met Police Commissioner has been to see the work in Durham, and there are lessons to be learned about how they have invested in technology, for example, where my predecessor failed to make progress. I would just add, crime is rising across the country, and between April 2017 and March 2018, it rose by 32% in Durham. In the same period, the Met saw an increase of only 6.4%.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Did you say there that the Police Commissioner had been up to see Mike Barton? I'm very heartened by that. I think that the point, though, to draw, I don't know, I'd like to know your view on this, is that it's, although undoubtedly cuts do play a huge part, it's not just about that. I mean, in the sense that what seems to have happened in Durham, as you say, it's a combination of Bobby's on the beat, which everyone always talks about, and really quite extraordinary technological innovation. And I wonder, are there any other lessons you think that the Met could draw from that to use? That basically ways in which maybe Durham are, if you like, heading the field and which we can actually follow.
It's just worth, just the context is important. So Durham is the size of one of our basic command units.
Mm.
So that's what we're talking about. You're right. They have had to face cuts, not as big as London has. But where they've been very, very impressive is use of technology. So by investing in technology, it's made it easier for police officers to spend more time on the front line. We're now investing in technology as well in London, really important. So officers aren't going back to the police station, writing up their notes. The tablets will make a big difference, as indeed all the body-worn cameras, really important. They've also not had to cut the community support officers to the numbers we have. We've lost a huge amount, 65, 70%. They haven't had to do that. And CSOs are really important as the eyes and ears of the PC. So the lessons that can be looked at from Durham, how they've made it work, but I think we've got to be realistic about scaling up what's happened in Durham to London. Not that being said, you know, they deserve huge congratulations for detection rates.
I think, yes, of course, we've got to be realistic about it, but it is a massive, massive gap between 5% and 18%, really, in terms of clear up. I mean, I think it's something definitely to take on board. And
I would also say it's also a big gap between 6.4% crime going up and 32% crime going up, which is the difference between London and Durham. So, you know, we can throw figures around.
What I think is the point is that the people of Durham, therefore, have confidence in their police force. And I feel that in London, that in fact this is actually decreasing. In this context, Mr. Mayor, I wonder whether I'd like your comment on this, something I brought up at the Police Crime Committee a number of times, relating to the Mayor, that as of up to January this year, rape in London had gone up by something like 20%. Now, I'm sure you'd agree with me that's quite a horrifying statistic, actually. When I did ask the Deputy Commissioner, and indeed the Commissioner about this, you know, there was a sort of a sense in which they didn't quite have a grip on the situation. Conviction rates for rape have actually gone down in the past 2 years from something like 13% to 7% in the same time. And I'm very worried that when it comes to actually the population of London having confidence in their own police force, that when we ask, you know, about the reasons why rape has gone up, they draw a blank and they say, we really don't know, there's something, quote them, there's something going on with sexual offending in London, but we don't really know what. I mean, what's your comment on that, Mr. Mayor, as the Chief Policeman, really?
Well, you've raised a number of different points, which I'll try and deal with one at a time. So firstly, the number of explanations for rape reports going up.
No, this is not just about reporting, Mr. Mayor. That was made quite clear. They don't know this. It's not just about reporting.
So one could be because victims have more confidence in reporting crimes to the police because of the heightened awareness because of historic incidents. Two is the historic incidents has led to many more complaints being made, which is a good thing. You'll have seen the publicity around disclosure in relation to the CPS, which has led to a number of cases, inverted commas, collapsing, not good enough in relation to the rules of disclosure not being followed, and you'll be aware of the review taking place in relation to that. As far as confidence in policing is concerned, it's not gone down as you suggest. The levels of confidence Londoners have in the police has remained consistent. You're right, though. We need to do a better job in relation to there being fewer crimes. We need to do a better job when there are crimes, those being detected and people who are responsible, charged, prosecuted and convicted as well.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, I think my time is more or less nearly up. I would just say that, you know, we've got a huge epidemic of knife crime, we've got violent crime, all of these things. And I think that this statistic about rape, for whatever reason, has been slightly overshadowed by that. In any other circumstances, in fact, we would really be discussing this every day. But thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Assembly Member Bacon and relates to the congestion charge for private hire vehicles.
Thank you, Chair. There is an urgent need to tackle increasing congestion and toxic air in central London. These streets are some of the most congested in the capital. This causes delays to final bus services.
One moment, Mr. Mayor. Would you remove that banner, please? And those banners, please put them down. Don't want you to cause a disturbance. I don't want to have to ask you to leave. Do sit down. We've seen you. We know you're there. Mr. Mayor.
There is an urgent need to tackle increasing congestion and toxic air in central London. These streets are some of the most congested in the capital. This causes delays to vital bus services, pushes air pollution to critical levels and makes too many places unpleasant for walking and cycling. To tackle congestion and clean up the capital's toxic air, we need appropriate interventions. On the 6th of July, TfL launched a consultation on a number of proposed changes to congestion charge exemptions and discounts. These include removing the exemption from the congestion charge for all private hire vehicles, except those designated as wheelchair accessible, and introducing a new cleaner vehicle discount to replace the current ultra-low emission discount. The purpose of these changes is to reduce traffic and congestion in central London, as well as improve air quality. If we do not take further action, by 2041, forecasts show that it will take more than an hour to travel 10 kilometres by road in central London. That's 15 minutes longer than it does today. In recent years, the impact of the congestion charge on congestion has lessened due to the increasing number of vehicles who are exempt from paying. Only half of the vehicles in the congestion charge zone in charging hours now pay the full charge. When the congestion charge was introduced over 15 years ago, it was expected that 4,000 different private hire vehicles would enter the zone daily. The figure is now over 18,000 private hire vehicles in the zone a day in charging hours. If the proposed changes are made, designated wheelchair accessible private hire vehicles will not be required to pay the charge, along with those that meet the requirements of the cleaner vehicle discount. Private hire vehicles that drive outside of the zone and also outside of the hours of operation will not be required to pay the charge. Although there would be a financial impact on private hire drivers and/or operators, there would be a positive impact on the wider population from reduced traffic and better air quality. The proposals remain subject to consultation, and I'd encourage everyone to respond so we can consider all views. No decision has been made yet, and I'll decide whether to take the proposals forward following the outcome of the consultation.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Could I please ask you to be silent? I can't make you sit down, but I can ask you to put away those signs and to be silent, please. Right. Senator Member Bacon.
Thank you for the answer, Mr. Mayor. What impact will this policy have on traffic levels in the congestion charging zone?
So the three different things looked at is the traffic impact on private vehicle traffic and the impact on overall traffic. So for private vehicle traffic, the assessment says a 6% reduction. For overall traffic, a 1% reduction.
1% reduction. So the private hire traffic reduction is how many unique entries per day?
So it goes from 18,000 unique entries a day to 10,000 unique entries a day.
Where did that figure come from, Mr. Mayor?
It's the analysis undertaken.
Because the analysis undertaken that I'm looking at, which is from the Cambridge Economic Policy Associates, which is what Transport for London have depended on, suggests that it will be 600 unique entries per day.
I think
you just said 6,000.
I think you're
in fact, you said 8,000.
So the research shows the absolute numbers of PHVs in the zone could fall from over 18,000 vehicles a day to 10,000. The vehicles that remain in the zone will make more journeys, so the traffic impact will be less and will reduce by the equivalent of 600 vehicles a day. So what some operators may do is those drivers already inside the zone do more work and those outside don't go in.
Okay, so the net impact is a reduction of 600 unique entries per day. Notwithstanding what you said, because I accept what you say, that people will stay in the zone and operate around it. So actually we're talking about 600 units per day or 600 unique entries per day. How much does Transport for London expect to raise if this proposal goes ahead?
The analysis indicates the removal of the exemption could raise up to £30 million per year. However, this assumes no private vehicles would qualify for other discounts or exemptions, e.g. the cleaner vehicle discount. If PHVs are eligible for other discounts or exemptions, this figure would be expected to go down. We hope that drivers will consider whether they need to enter the zone in charging hours, and those that do will switch to the cleanest possible vehicles. It's not about raising revenues, it's about dealing with congestion.
But if they change to cleaner vehicles, they won't have to pay the congestion charge, so it won't make any difference on congestion, will it?
No, the idea is to do two things. One is the congestion, two is the air quality. You'll appreciate the discount for cleaner vehicles stops in 2025, and the idea is we have zero emission vehicles.
Yes, I'm focusing on congestion for the purpose of this question, though. In percentage terms, how much more would a small operator have to charge in order to cover the costs of paying the congestion charge?
There's three options open to an operator. One is for the operator to pay the charge. Two is for that charge to be paid for by the driver and/or by the passengers. So those are the decisions for the operator to take.
But again, Mr Mayor, the report that TfL are relying on estimates that a small operator would have to raise their charges by 16%. And off the back of that, the same report states, and I'll quote it to you, it's likely to have a disproportionately large impact on trips provided by small operators, as they would be less able to accommodate the increased charge, and some small operators could subsequently be forced out of business. Drivers are also likely to bear at least some of the charge, particularly for the largest operators, and this could adversely impact on already low earnings. Are you content with that?
That's why I asked for an impact assessment to be done, so we can see the impact of these plans. It's for operators to decide how they spread out the charge. So the charge, if it's £10.50, if it's automated, could be paid by the operator, and the operator could decide to specialise and have a finite number of vehicles going into the C-charge area. The operator could decide to share it with the driver, if the driver wanted to go to the C-charge area, or the operator could decide for the passenger to pay the charge, or a percentage of the charge. So, for example, a driver made 10 journeys in the C-charge area in a day. You'd expect a passenger to pay £1 extra according to the trip he or she makes. So that's the decision for the operators to take, not for us to dictate to the operator how they spread the charge.
But as the report has made very clear, the smaller operators who are earning the least money are likely to be hit disproportionately hard because they won't be able to absorb it. They will have to either pass it on or they won't be able to operate anymore. Does that not cause you some concern?
Well, the smaller operators already decided not to work in central London because of the challenges made by other big companies that we know about and we've talked about in the past. What we do need to realise is that actually when the C-charge was first brought in, the exemption was brought in for ostensibly to encourage those minicab operators who weren't licensed to become licensed to carrot, if you like. Mm-hmm. But also at that stage, the expectation was 4,000 vehicles coming into the C-charge area a day. It's now 18,000 vehicles coming into the C-charge area a day. And so one of all this is subject to consultation, by the way. One of the things that the plans are seeking to do is to reduce the numbers of vehicles coming into the C-charge area. According to the research you're reading, from 18,000, the number of vehicles coming in could be as low as 10,000, which is 8,000 fewer vehicles coming into the C-charge area.
Well, actually, no, as we've already discussed, Mr Mayor, the conclusion of the report is that the net reduction would be 600 vehicles because a number of the vehicles would come in and stay.
But think about road space. So if you think of road space, for example, 10,000 vehicles not coming into the C-charge area is, in road space terms, a big amount of road space. So it's not simply a question of vehicles, it's a question of road space, congestion, air quality, but congestion is the main issue.
Your answer there defeats your own argument because, as you have said yourself, the vehicles will come into the congestion charging zone and stay there. That doesn't equate to an increase in road space. It equates to it being exactly the same, or at least a marginal difference. That's why the net figure of 600 is significant.
No, there is a reduction in road space. Just logically, if you think about it, there's fewer vehicles coming in.
But they're staying longer.
Well,
they're not leaving. They're coming in and staying, and that's the point, Mr. Mayor. That's why the net decrease of 600 is so significant in the context of this. It will not free up
the amount
road
of
space.
The number of unique vehicles coming in is 45% less. The impact on private vehicle traffic is 6% less, and the impact on overall traffic is 1% less. Whichever way you slice it and dice it, there are still fewer vehicles, less overall traffic, and less PHV traffic.
So there's going to be 600 fewer units net. There's going to be a decrease of 1% in the congestion charging zone. At the same time, there is going to be a massively disproportionate cost passed on to those cab firms that are least able to pay them. Does that not cause you any concern?
Well, I mean, one of the things that we need to do is look at the consultation responses. I'm sure those smaller firms will be responding, not just the big companies that we have seen protests about today, the Ubers. We want to see small companies respond to the consultation.
When you increased the operator fees by thousands of % earlier this year, since then, by the end of February, 40 minicab firms in London had ceased trading. According to the Private Hire Licensing Compliance and Enforcement report released by Transport for London yesterday, that number has increased to at least 57. Do you think that this policy is going to do anything to improve that situation?
Well, as you know, a number of minicab drivers work for more than one operator, and so those figures don't reflect the number of operators who are still driving in London. You'll be aware, for example, that though many people drive for Uber, drive for other companies as well. The key reason behind these plans, which we're consulting on, is to reduce the number of vehicles coming into central London, private hire vehicles, and to address the issue of congestion. I've given you the answer in relation to my opening question of the congestion that could be by 2041 if no action was taken. We're talking about a journey of 10 kilometres taking an hour. So we want to take action, and these plans which we're consulting on is one of the things we're doing to encourage people to use cars less in central London. The aim is by 2041 to have 80% of journeys either walking, cycling or public transport, and that public transport, by the way, is sustainable, which is very, very important.
Mr Mayor, I think the need to reduce congestion in central London is something that most people will agree on. But I think what this exchange has shown is that actually this measure will have a very minor increase on congestion in central London. But the cumulative policies that are being put forward by Transport for London in your name are going to have an absolutely devastating impact on the private hire industry. They've already had to contend with massive increases in their licence fees, way, way, way disproportionate to the actual cost of implementing them. Now they're going to have to deal with this. Can you see why people will be forgiven, in particular the private hire industry, in believing that Transport for London is deliberately setting out to destroy their industry?
Well, I'm sorry if people think that. That's why if they do feel they should respond to the consultation on the plans we've consulted on. It is a fact, though, that between 2008 and 2016, the number of private hire vehicles jumped from a figure approaching 50,000 to a figure approaching 120,000. Now, you may think it's acceptable for that figure to keep on going higher and higher and higher and higher and higher and higher each year, but that's inconsistent with the point you claimed to have made earlier on, that you agree congestion is a problem. You can't have it both ways. If you think congestion is a problem, you should want fewer vehicles in central London.
That this is going to do nothing to combat congestion. What it's going to do is drive private hire industry companies out of business. But it's not going to do anything for congestion. All it's going to do, the only upside that I can see for this, is that it will raise an extra 30 million quid that TfL can chuck into the black hole that they've got.
Well, you've accepted. Let me deal with again, the premise of the question is a number of red herrings in it, which I'll address. Firstly, the £1 billion figure is a figure that the previous mayor had in his business plan. It was north of £1 billion in his business plan, and towards the end of his business plan, it was still going to be in deficit. Our business plan has a situation where by the end of the business plan, that deficit becomes zero and then becomes a surplus, which shows our plans to make TfL not have deficits of that figure, but to have it in surplus. But secondly, even by your own figures, you accept there will be reduction in PHVs coming into central London. You accept that there will be less PHV traffic in central London, and you accept there will be less overall traffic in central London. That's really important if we're going to address congestion.
No, actually, Mr Mayor, without you putting words in my mouth, I accept that this report states that. But this report, bearing in mind this is the report that TfL are relying on to argue this policy, is suggesting a tiny decrease in the amount of traffic in London, a very big impact on particularly the lower paid PHV drivers, and an income in the tens of millions for Transport for London. For me, Mr Mayor, this doesn't really amount to a policy that ticks the boxes that you claim that you're wanting to be ticking.
Is that a speech or a question, Chair? I'm unclear. You've probably ruled that in order as well.
It's a rhetorical question.
Yes,
okay.
it does need an
Is that in order then, is it?
It was a rhetorical question, yes.
Can I encourage all the Labour groups to make rhetorical questions as well? Clearly that's the...
No, you do it too.
Do I?
Yes, you do.
All the time.
Okay, if you finish. Okay, can we go on to the next question, please, which relates to President...
Sorry, Chair, is that it?
Yeah, that's it. Can we deal with the next question, President Trump's visit to London, Assemblymember Dismall's question?
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased that the Met's policing of the visit was a success, and in coming to London, President Trump experienced an open and diverse city that has always chosen unity over division and hope over fear. He will also no doubt have seen that Londoners hold their liberal values of freedom of speech very dear. There is, however, a significant policing cost attributed to any event of this scale. The true cost will not be known for a few weeks while the Met calculate the considerable overtime costs. I'm pleased that positive conversations have already been had with the Home Office about a special grant application. It would be unacceptable if this is not approved and would be yet another financial pressure on the Met's already strained resources. This is an example of the disproportionate cost of policing that falls on London as the national capital, which central government continually refused to sufficiently fund. The national and international capital city grant of £170 million is around half of the £340 million it costs to meet these demands. I'll continue to press government to fully fund these pressures to ensure we have enough police officers to keep our city safe and secure. With regard to the abstraction of officers, I'm proud to have restored neighbourhood police in London by doubling the number of dedicated officers in every ward. And these officers are now truly dedicated to the wards they police, where in the past they were abstracted routinely. Abstractions are now down to just 5%. We've always been clear that some abstractions will be needed for major events such as New Year's Eve, Notting Hill Carnival, and extraordinary visits such as this. The difference now is that local communities are told about obstructions and that they will soon be able to be tracked online. Across the Friday and Saturday, 242 dedicated ward officers were obstructed, 139 on the Friday and 103 on the Saturday. In both cases, they came from the north and south of London. While any obstructions are unfortunate, good planning meant this was lower than it might have been. I want to thank all the officers and staff of the Met Police for their work over a challenging few days and everything they do to keep London safe and secure.
Thank you for that. Reports suggest that Police Scotland will receive £5 million from the Home Office towards the cost of the President's private golf trip to Scotland. Well, they could stop a paraglider protester anyway. I assume you've not received any assurances the Met will also be reimbursed the full cost of policing the Trump visit, which were clearly going to be more than policing a golf course. Given the need to abstract dedicated ward officers from the boroughs to make up the 4,000 officers, I believe, that were required for President Trump's visit to the capital, at the same time as other major demands like Pride, World Cup crowds and so on, it really is important that the government start to properly fund the NICC, isn't it?
I mean, you articulate the reasons why we are frustrated at the failure to fund us as a national and international capital city. Just think about the sporting events we have. Wimbledon's just finished. Think about the concerts we have, British Summertime in Hyde Park. Just think about the visits we have, the parades we have, the protests we have. The government's going to recognise that funding us just half of the amount that they accept that we need isn't good enough. That's why it's really important that the government funds us fully for the NIC, the National International Capital City Funds, that they fund us properly in relation to the cuts they made over the last few years, reverse those cuts, but also realise our population is growing, but we get each day 1.5 million additional visitors, tourists, commuters coming into our city. So our city's not simply 8.9 million, it's that plus 1.5 million each day.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question is from Assembly Member Prince, and it's on London's bus mileage.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question. The bus network is vital to London's continued economic and social development, and to meeting our target of 80% of Londoners' journeys being made using sustainable transport by 2041. The bus network will be reshaped in inner London to reflect changing travel patterns and make it more reliable for passengers, while in outer London we want to increase capacity to support growth and get people out of their cars. Talking purely about bus mileage doesn't give the full picture of how passengers use and experience the bus network. Since May 2016, TfL has reduced bus mileage by around 0.5%. TfL has put in 66 capacity increases under my mayoralty to meet areas of growing demand. I've frozen TfL fares and started the unlimited hopper to make bus travel more affordable. So far, more than 200 million hopper journeys have been made. We know people are using other options to get around, particularly in central London. And with the new hopper fare, changes to other parts of public transport are changing demand. TfL also expects around 40 million journeys to transfer from the bus network to the Elizabeth line by 2021. In this context, TfL is working to modernise and simplify the bus network and make sure it reflects changing travel patterns. TfL will continue to focus on journey times and reliability, both of which have improved over the past 12 months. This does mean bus mileage will be reduced in inner and central London, where there is excess capacity. Certain corridors, like Kingsway, currently have more than 100 buses passing through every hour. This will bring benefits including reduced congestion, lower emissions and better road safety. We've already reduced the number of buses that use Oxford Street by 40%, bringing benefits, and will continue to reduce this further. In outer London, there will be an overall increase in capacity. The network will be rebalanced to reduce congestion and duplication where buses go through the middle of town centres, creating a better network of routes across outer London. And TfL will be providing more detail on these plans in its business plan later this year. TfL is required to consult on many types of structural changes to the network, but I want to go above and beyond that requirement. My Deputy Mayor for Transport and I have made very clear we want extensive engagement with a wide range of stakeholders and customers about changes to the network.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I actually start by congratulating you on putting on the England semi-final event at Hyde Park. I thought it was an absolutely amazing event, and I think it really captured the spirit of Londoners and all our hopes and dreams, which were all obviously shattered, but nonetheless, I just feel, credit where it's due. I thought it was a wonderful event, and hats off to you for that one. so that's a nice bit over.
On that, Keith, just finish the last bit. The note you dropped me was very generous, and I've passed your note on to others to thank them for the organising the event. I did pass on your email.
Thank you, yeah. Okay, so you said that bus journeys are down by 0.5%, but TfL in the operational performance plan say that bus mileage kilometres is going to go down by 6% from 2019 to 2020 from now. So where's that? How do you offset that against your 0.5%?
Well, so we're looking at the figure I've given you is from 2016 until now.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
It's gone down by 0.5%. What I'm also clear about is there may be a reduction in mileage in inner central London, but there needs to be an increase in outer London. I would say this, that the criteria for measuring success, I think, shouldn't just be bus mileage. It should also be journey times, it should be reliability, it should be bus speed, it should be experience, and all those things, the good news is, are improving and need to continue to improve.
Would you add to that usage?
Yeah, and some buses are very popular. But look, we all get frustrated. You must have seen it, I have, when you see buses going along back to back and they're empty. And so when talking about usage, we've got to make sure buses are being used frequently. Sometimes you can have more usage by actually, it sort of sounds perverse, by reducing frequency. Rather than having 3 buses back to back, the same number, coming at the same time, with clever use of satellite technology, if you were to have 2 buses, but they were, well, you were certain when they were going to arrive, and you knew it's reliable to get from A to B, you're more likely to use it. And so sometimes we get obsessed by numbers and not looking at bus usage. And bus usage is dictated often by reliability, about if you can get from A to B in a certain time, and also the experience you have. Is it a clean bus? Is it cool? And all those sorts of things.
So when will we see the increase in bus kilometerage? I'm not sure why we measure it in kilometerage, but we do. In outer London. When can we expect to see these additional buses or miles driven or whatever it is?
If you remember, previous MQTs, Floa Shalomi asked me a question about this, and I couldn't give her an answer in relation to mileage in different parts of London, and I was frustrated by this. And what I promised I would do is ask TfL to, by the next business plan, give you an idea of different parts of London. And so the short answer is, for the first time, you'll have the information out in a more specific rather than pan-London, and we're hoping to see an increase, and it's contingent on if there's a housing development, Keith. So if there's a housing development which leads to passengers, customers, you expect more buses to be there. And we can work with boroughs in relation to the roads they control around town centres. You'd expect to see increases there. But also don't forget, because of the unlimited hopper, particularly in outer London, people will jump on and off a bus they wouldn't otherwise do. So a bus doesn't need to get from start to destination because you can jump on and off. So it doesn't necessarily mean more buses per se, but you'd want to see more passengers using them.
So is that clear then, that in spite of the savings that you're clearly having to make, you're committing to increasing the bus kilometerage, I don't know why I use that, in outer London? You're committed to more buses in outer London. Are you saying you would make more buses now?
Can I use mileage? It's just a bit easier. It rolls off the tongue better. So look, so I'd expect to see a reduction in central inner London and an increase in outer London of bus mileage.
So we would expect to see that?
Oh, we would expect to see that, yeah.
Right. So I just want to make sure, Mr Mayor, because I know this is a problem for some politicians, that your woods are your woods and they won't turn into woodens.
No, I mean, the phrase, it's a good question. Chair, I mean, actually, I know it's tongue-in-cheek, but you're raising a really important point because that is the intention. The phrase used before was protecting outer London services. You're right. It's protecting what we had. Because obviously, if passengers stop using the buses, we're not going to run empty buses. The good news is around the country, whereas we've seen a fall in bus usage, roughly speaking, of 2.2% around the country, in London, that fall's only 0.6%. And one of the explanations, I'm told, is we had a TfL fares freeze, whereas outside London they increased bus fares by 4.4%. So as long as passengers are using the buses, we'd expect to see usage and mileage increase. Clearly, if it's the case, given a hypothetical, if no one's using a bus in outer London, we're not going to run the service. And so with those caveats, I'd want to see an increase in outer London.
but we're not going to get the bus price reduction you promised, are we?
Well, sorry,
we're not going to get the bus price reduction that you promised, the fares decrease you promised.
We've had questions with a false premise. We're having promises that just completely. So, unless somebody can find a reference to my manifesto, I'm not sure what the Assembly member refers to.
It was in your campaign papers that you put out as one of your promises in your campaign paper that you put out, which admittedly now has a qualifier saying that all these are no longer necessarily correct. But you did promise to reduce bus fares.
Chair, I'm not sure if that's a rhetorical question or...
I don't know what that was, no. Have you finished?
I finished, yeah.
Assembly Member Pigeon.
Yes, I've raised the issue about cuts to bus services with you before. Your new Deputy Mayor has agreed to review consultation on significant changes to bus frequency, and I have raised this with you previously. Do you now support this, and are you looking at where you can consult and engage more with the community as you change services?
I always support my Deputy Mayor, but just so you're right. You've raised the, and so Senator Dismal raised the issue of consulting on services changing. Significant changes. Yeah, and so I think Heidi Alexander is quite keen to address some of those concerns. And what she wants to do is speak to you about, and Andrew Dismal's raised this as well, about how we can consult better, including your advice on who the key stakeholders are. What we use to do that. Bearing in mind, there are loads of changes take place all the time for very good reasons. And you're not suggesting all those are consulted or communicated upon, but I think your point, which is a good point, which Heidi's persuaded by, is that we've got to communicate better with local communities. That could be the Assembly, councils, residents groups, community groups, accessibility groups, and on and on and on. So I think she wants to work with you to improve communications, and that's a good thing, I think.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Assembly Member O'Connell, and it relates to public engagement with the police.
Thank you, Chair. Modern policing relies on the consent and support of the public. How the public engage how the police engage with the public is incredibly important. I know Assembly Member O'Connell is passionate about this, Chair. This starts at the most local level. In line with my commitment to restore real neighbourhood policing, every ward in London has been assigned at least 2 dedicated ward officers. That's 1,258 across London, double the number under the previous mayor, alongside a PCSO, a Police Community Support Officer, in every ward. Public engagement is a key element of the role of the dedicated ward officers, making regular visits to schools, colleges, places of worship and community hubs through social media, ward panel meetings and street briefings. But I'm not complacent. We can and will go further to embed dedicated ward officers in local communities. The consultation on the public access and engagement strategy in 2017 provided a lot of feedback on what is already working well and what isn't. Since then, MOPAC and the GLA have been hosting a joint working group with the Met Police to develop a new approach to public engagement. This new approach is based on an inform, influence and involve model, and the outcome of this work will be announced before the end of this financial year. There already are many opportunities for the public to engage with the police and policing. For example, in the last 2 years, borough-level safer neighbourhood boards have delivered over 350 public engagement opportunities where the police and the public have come together to address local problems and to share information and crime prevention advice. The independent custody visiting scheme brings together over 200 community volunteers who visit police detainees in pairs to ensure their rights and entitlements are being upheld by the police. My Office of Policing and Crime supports the Borough Stop and Search community monitoring groups. These are groups of people from the local community who regularly scrutinise stop and search data and observe the use of stop and search powers during policing operations. More broadly, the police also engage members of the public with specific experience and expertise through independent advisory groups, for example, and a special constable and police cadets, which offer valuable opportunities for the public to engage with the police on a variety of issues. I'll continue to do what I can to support and encourage the public to engage with the police, and help from some members is greatly appreciated.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. The last Mayor and myself and other members recognise the importance of engagement and local accountability. Indeed, he set a target that was far too optimistic, but at least he indeed set a target. Would you not agree that more than ever it is important to engage with Londoners over crime and safety through proper structures?
No, I agree. Not just through proper structures, but also informally as well. If we believe in policing by consent, I know you do, we need the public to be police officers and CSOs' eyes and ears. And so there are formal structures which are important. One of the things that the engagement strategy will be looking at is if there are other informal routes. You've seen the advance of social media. You've also seen the importance of informal dialogues. Could be at school fairs, could be in places of worship and other places as well. So it's important to have structured consultation, engagement, but also informal and fluid as well.
You wrote to me in November 17 on this subject, saying that you would be publishing a full community engagement strategy next year, i.e. this year. Are you saying, Mr Mayor, that actually that's not going to happen and you'll be launching this in 2019 plus, won't it? Is that correct?
So we're hoping, so that the work from the public access and engagement strategy that we consulted on last year, analysing the feedback, a lot of that was based on front counters and police stations, which is different to the issue you and I are talking about in relation to engagement. And so we're keen to look at how best we can engage and get that as soon as we can.
Okay, that is later than you said. When did you last? I hosted indeed with the previous deputy mayor events in this building for safer neighbourhood board chairs, walled panel chairs, neighbourhood watch chairs. We were very conscious to support these volunteers. They are good people given of their time. When did you last hold such an event and invite those good people into City Hall? In essence, perhaps to even thank them for what they do.
You mean the deputy mayor?
Through you.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not going to date when there was last one of those meetings, but the deputy mayor and myself regularly meet these volunteers when we go around London.
Yeah, that's a kind of ad hoc. I mean, I think it's right that these people are recognised and thanked and informed by yourself. And I'm disappointed that you haven't invited them into this building. There are many people who volunteer to serve their communities. I'm pleased you mentioned that you are supportive of safer neighbourhood boards, and my colleague Tony Devenish will be asking a few questions about a particular council that is intending to abolish safer neighbourhood boards and walled panels. Would you not agree, Mr Mayor, however, that no councils have any authority to abolish boards, which are indeed a mechanism of yourself and MOPAC?
You're right, there are independent boards which a council can't abolish, but if a council wants to find other ways to engage with the community, we're happy to talk to a council.
Okay. Confidence continues to flatline. I mentioned that the previous mayor set a target. It was 20%. It was too high, but at least it was an aspiration to improve confidence Londoners in their police. It continues to flatline around the mid to late 60s. Do you think that's an acceptable level?
I think in the context of I want people to be completely happy with the police service and the work we do. But the context is important. Our police officers are under-resourced and overstretched. I meet officers on a regular basis who've had rest days cancelled, are working overtime. The ratio now of officer to Londoners, it used to be 4 officers to 1,000 in 2010. It's now 3 officers to 1,000 8 years on. So you can understand why members of the public are seeing fewer police officers, and that's before you take into account the additional visitors and visitors, commuters and tourists we have in London. So I can understand why there's not been an improvement, and that's the context, and so that's why it's important that we try and get more resources, more police officers, so confidence grows.
Okay. I don't necessarily see the analysis and connection about numbers on streets with confidence, because it's a different process.
Well,
so
let me explain why then. So if it's the case, which is often said to us, you must have heard it, I've not seen a police officer on my street for a while, that leads to less confidence. And so the point I'm making is, it may actually be factually correct that they have seen fewer police officers on their street for a while because of the cuts made by central government. And actually confidence isn't going down, it's remaining consistent because of the hard work of the overstretched and under-resourced officers. A smaller number of officers, the fewest we've had since 2003, doing the work in a city which is where the population has grown.
I would just conclude by suggesting that I think under your tenure, the public engagement and confidence and the structures within have been unfortunately allowed to wither. Those volunteers, I don't feel that they sense they're being valued and supported as much as they perhaps should be by MOPAC and yourself. And I would urge you, Mr Mayor, perhaps to ask your Deputy Mayor MOPAC to revisit those safe neighbourhood boards and walled panels, and not forgetting Neighbourhood Watch, of course, which we're blessed with, to give them more support, not necessarily financial, but support in their work, Mr Mayor. I would urge you that. You may wish to respond, but
Chair,
that is all.
Chair, can I respond? I'll take the suggestion in the spirit it's meant, which is that we've got people who volunteer because they believe in the community, and it's important they're appreciated. So actually, I think, put aside the knockabout stuff, I'll take away the point that was made about appreciating volunteers, encouraging them, thanking them. It's really important we do that. And so let me take that away. And what I'll do is, actually, I'll get in touch with you about other ideas you may have to show volunteers they're valued and appreciated. Because they add value, you're right, it's not just about resources, it's about them being good citizens and being appreciated for that.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Devonish.
Of what Hammersmith and Fulham Council is trying to do on this topic that Assembly Member O'Connell's just raised with you?
Do you mean the concerns around safe and neighbourhood boards?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Yeah, I'm aware about the concerns around safe and neighbourhood boards, yeah.
And do you think it's appropriate that a council wants to try and merge a very well-functioning community organisation with all other areas of council services, be it environment, they've written to us said, or homelessness, or community safety and health, and all the other issues, rather than focusing on something that, if it ain't broke, why fix it?
Well, look, Chair, I think the issue is the council not unreasonably want to make sure that the consultation, the engagement, is one that is a good one. And so I think what the council are seeking to do is to make sure the public engagement works, and so they're trying to make the board more representative. And so I think the chair of the committee was right. A council can't disband an independent body. What a council can do is seek to improve and finesse, and if the process isn't working, the consultation isn't there, the board isn't representative, hypothetically speaking, then I think it's not improper for a council to work with us to try and improve it.
So, as you said to Assembly Member O'Connell, will you talk to MOPAC, please, to defend the local ward police panels as they are currently constituted, rather than allow a borough council leader to try and take it over?
I think what we'll do, Chair, is talk to the council about the concerns they've got, seek to address those concerns. At the same time, I think the point made by the chair of the committee was we've got to value and show appreciation to the volunteers who work voluntarily because they believe in community, and we'll seek to do all those things.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question on Oxford Street pedestrianisation falls because Assembly Member Pigeon is out of time. So we go on to Brexit and security. Question from Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Brexit is a national challenge facing policing and our security services, and the Met are working closely with the National Police Chiefs Council, who alongside the National Crime Agency have established a team to drive and coordinate Brexit contingency planning for UK law enforcement. This team is working closely with the Home Office and the Department for Exiting the EU to understand and prepare for the effects of Brexit on UK security. My Deputy Mayor and I meet the Met Police Commissioner regularly to discuss a broad range of issues, including the potential impact of Brexit on the safety and security of Londoners. I also recently met with the now former Secretary of State for Exiting the EU, David Davis MP, to emphasise to him the need for a deal that ensures prosperity and security for London. Yet on the day I met with him, Michael Barnier was clear that as a third country, the UK will be outside these vital arrangements. I'm therefore seeking an urgent meeting with the new Secretary of State, Dominic Raab, MP, to discuss these matters. It is clear that the government has not prioritised the issue of security. I've set out what I think are the 6 key measures we should be seeking to remain part of: Europol, the European Arrest Warrant, the Schengen Information System 2, the Schengen Information System 2, EU Passenger Name Records, the European Criminal Records Information System, and the Prüm arrangements, but the government position is putting them at risk. The Met Commissioner recently stated to the Police and Crime Committee that any alternatives to the loss of existing tools would be clunkier, clumsier, and more expensive. Any lessening in our access to the European Arrest Warrant, Europol, or SIS-2 database will only create more work for our already stretched police officers, but will almost certainly lead to delays on information sharing and an easier ride for criminals. The inevitable consequences will mean Londoners are less safe, and I refuse to believe anyone voted for that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, the Home Affairs Select Committee report into security arrangements post-Brexit, which came out earlier this year, concluded that, and I quote, the public debate on this aspect of Brexit has been seriously lacking both in detail and urgency. Do you share this assessment? Do you agree? Do you think that security concerns have not been given enough consideration in all the various debates? I hear what you said and all the representations you've been making and all the meetings that you've had and are asking for. But do do you feel that much more can be done to stimulate this debate?
I don't think there's been enough discussion about the concerns around security post-Brexit. I don't think the government's taken it seriously and prioritising it. But we should realise that police officers, chief constables, can't be advocates publicly. They can respond to questions the Police and Crime Committee asks, they can respond to select committees, but they can't lobby like the CBI or London First or Chamber of Commerce or FSB or others can. And so our job as politicians is to be their advocates, to explain the concerns around security post-Brexit. That's why I'm pleased you asked the question.
Again, having heard what you said in your answer, but can you very specifically put on record the impact of losing all these various databases for London and Londoners? And have you made any specific representations, either you or your Deputy Mayor for Police and Crime, to keep access to these vital security arrangements?
So we have. I mean, I've had a full presentation given to me by the expert who leads on this, from the Met Police to the National Police and Chief Constables. In my meeting with David Davis, the last time I met with him, I impressed upon the importance of these and the concerns we have. Let me give you one example in relation to what we'd lose. So the SIS2 database was searched automatically in 2017 539 million times by our law enforcement people. Let me give another one. 1,735 criminals were arrested using the European arrest warrant in 2017. Europol supported 600 UK operations. So here are examples of how operationally the European Union assists us in relation to security and policing. If it's the case we're a third party, we can't have access to this on the same terms. Barnier's confirmed that. And so the government's got to realise that actually they need a plan to address these concerns.
Thank you. You just told us that, and I quote, the government has not prioritized security. And in your opening statement earlier this morning, you asked the Prime Minister to put the national interest before our own interest. You also said to put country before party. Do you feel that the infighting that we are seeing within the Cabinet and the Conservative Party is damaging our chances of achieving a deal on security arrangements? Does it help?
Listen, it doesn't help. People in Brussels watch what's happening in London and are astounded that Article 50 was served without the government having any plans what the destination was going to be. Astounded that a year and a half after negotiations began, the person in charge of it's resigned. Somebody else has taken over at the 11th hour and is now in charge of delicate negotiations that must end by the end of October. Why? Because the European institutions and the British Parliament need time to vote on these before the end of March. We've got no details of what the plans are going to be in relation to security arrangements. And just think about, on a day-to-day basis, it will mean that the police's ability, the security service's ability to keep us safe is less good than it was before we left the European Union. That can't be right, and no one's talking about it.
I should just say, Chair, in public, that the Police and Crime Committee will be looking at this issue in some detail later on this year.
Good.
Thank you very much. Next question relates to the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation, and is from Assembly Member Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question. Yes, I do. It's an opportunity that I'm determined should not be wasted, and one that the government should back to. My draft New London plan has identified that the Old Oak and Park Royal area has the capacity to deliver at least 25,000 homes by 2028. This area can become an amazing new part of London, built around what is planned to be the largest station to be built in the UK in a century. The regeneration of Old Oak and Park Royal can play a significant role in meeting both London-wide and local housing needs, including genuinely affordable homes, homes for families, and specialist homes, all provided as part of a mixed and balanced community. OPDC is planning for the delivery of about 1,000 homes a year, which would be delivered in line with my housing policies. We're aiming for 50% of these homes to be affordable, which would mean the delivery of 10,000 new genuinely affordable homes in the area by 2038. But this is a complex site and needs a lot of infrastructure to make it a viable proposition. We're working with OPDC to prepare a detailed business case for support from the government's Housing Infrastructure Fund for £250 million to unlock this important site and kickstart delivery. We're looking for a positive outcome to this by the end of the year. The sooner a positive decision is taken by the government, the sooner we can kick off delivery. As part of this, the OPDC team is working with existing landowners and with HS2 to plan for this area in a comprehensive way. This will ensure we can get the best outcome for Londoners.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When was the last time you met with Liz Pearce or Michael Mahern?
I think I saw Liz a couple of weeks ago. I can send you the exact date, but quite recently.
Your comments would suggest that you're well aware that they've submitted a bid to the government's housing infrastructure plan for £250 million for infrastructure. Obviously, you're aware of that. I'm just going for my questions here. If this bid is unsuccessful, what will you be doing to help support the infrastructure plan on that side? Because obviously you said it's complicated, but they do need to get this infrastructure done. What will your office do to help that out?
So we hope it is successful. I mean, our officials have been working closely with officials at HCLG, in consultation with the Treasury as well, and so we're confident it'll be successful. If it wasn't successful, hypothetically speaking, of course, we'd want to know why, what the concerns the government had were, because this is an ideal case for infrastructure funding, because actually a lot of the land that needs to be unlocked needs things like new bridges, new roads, new utilities, land assembly, the things that a planning authority, a development corporation, the mayor can't do by ourselves. And so I'd be surprised if we weren't successful, and if we were, we'd have to consider why we weren't.
We all hope we're successful. Let's just put that out there. But of course, if your office had done more, we would have to wait to see if we were successful. There's a number of things. There was a plan, I think it was in 2016, around SIL that people talked about could raise 380 million. That would have been more than enough to deliver this infrastructure. What happened to that plan? Why wasn't it pursued? Where is it now?
So I'm not sure what plan you're referring to. What we've done is the OPDC has undertaken a review, and there were concerns in relation to the previous deal done by the mayor, for example, with Network Rail, the lack of planning gain that we had.
No, but sorry, Mayor, just to help you out here. As a planning authority, OPDC can bring forward a SIL. They had a plan for SIL. People talked about £380 million happening. What has happened to that plan? Where has it gone? Why hasn't your office pursued it? Why haven't they pursued it? That would have answered this question, and we'd be well on our way to getting our 11,000 homes.
All right. So it's a development corporation, just to explain to you what it is. So OPDC is a development corporation.
I understand that.
Right. So the way SIL works, let me explain, is it's a levy applied for infrastructure.
Sorry, mate, I understand that. What I'm saying is there was already a plan. It was started in 2016 for SIL.
Right.
What happened to it?
Right.
Where has that plan gone now? Why wasn't that money pursued? Because you wouldn't be having this quick conversation about government infrastructure planning, because we'd have had the money already. We'd have been able to do it with our own money in London.
Right. Well, I was explaining, Chair, I thought about 3 minutes ago about the review, but I'll try again. So there was a review undertaken in 2016, 2017 around OPDC, and the recommendations of the review have been acted upon in relation to how we can get development on this site. Already we've started on development on parts of the site where there is no need for the infrastructure that we require to undertake. So parts of the north of the site, we've already seen commercial space undertaken, the work undertaken. We've already seen homes brought forward, and we've already seen planning permission granted for more homes. A lot of the site, particularly the western site, needs serious investment, and the Housing Infrastructure Fund is what we've applied for to get that investment. Now, it is possible to use SIL to fund infrastructure projects in appropriate sites where it's appropriate. And this particular site, the SIL is not appropriate. It's also IMSIL as well, which we can use.
Why isn't it appropriate for SIL? What happened to the plan? The plan seemed to have disappeared. If you're saying it's not appropriate, could you just let me know why it wasn't appropriate for SIL?
Well, the way SIL generally works is for the businesses to come forward and contribute towards, whether it's planning gain or other forms, the infrastructure required to make a site ready for development. And so a review was undertaken on how we can speed up and accelerate OPDC. We've had conversations with the DFT in relation to the Network Rail land. You'll all be aware in relation to the development around High Speed 2 as well, and the depot in relation to the Elizabeth line as well. So there is work being undertaken here for the reasons set out in the review, which I can send you a copy of.
Please do, because none of that explains adequately why the SIL was not pursued, and that's just died. But just moving on, Mayor, in the interest of time. So if we're not successful, and again we all hope we are, do you have a plan B? Does OPDC have a plan B? Because you're at risk here of losing all these houses. You are under pressure to deliver your own target. Is there a plan B?
So we're in danger of repeating the answer I gave to the previous question. So in answer to your previous question about plan B, I'm hopeful we'll be confident in relation to the submission we've made to the government. If we're not successful, we do want to ask the government why we weren't successful, what the reasons were. Because obviously if we are successful, it generates interest from the private sector as well, but it means we can unlock some of this land. The other pots of money we're using to invest in this on this site are, for example, for those sites coming forward, we're using some of our affordable housing funds to make sure half the homes that are brought forward are affordable housing. We've already had some homes brought forward between 30 and 40% affordable housing, which is progress being made. We'd want to see the reasons the government said no, then try to address those.
Mr. Mayor, that's we understand the site's good. We like that you have an affordable housing movement, but none of that sounds like a plan B. You've been given 4.82 billion to spend on delivering housing. Have you written to the government to ask if you can use some of that money for this infrastructure? I mean, 250 million would only be just over 5%. Have you asked that question?
So the affordable housing grant, the rules are quite clear. Let me explain those to you. So
No. I understand the rules, and I know they're very clear. What I'm asking is, you don't seem to have a plan B, so have you written just to ask the question? It would just be a letter. You could say to the government, we could potentially be opening 11,000, some estimates say 12,000 homes here. Have you written just to ask the question if you could redirect just a small proportion of that money to open this?
Well, let me explain to you why we haven't, which is very, very simple. So the amount of money we've got from the government is to start 116,000 homes by 2022. The homes we're talking about here on this site, many of them won't begin until the late 2020s and the early 2030s. I suspect some people may want affordable homes sooner rather than later, which is why it's important that the £4 billion we've secured from the government is used to make housing starts between now and 2022. Well, you claim to understand, but clearly you don't.
Yeah, but what you seem to understand, you have an opportunity here to deliver these houses in that time frame, and you're not pursuing it. We all know we have a desperate need for housing in London. You could be doing something very quickly here, and you're not. And it sounds like it's because they won't be delivered in your current term. But that's enough from me, Chair.
Okay. Assembly Member Devonish.
Mr. Mayor, I'm very pleased with the progress on Old Oak Development Corporation in partnership working between different parts of government. Can I take you back to the point I made right at the beginning of today in terms of the Church Street redevelopment? Similar part of West London, great scheme. You'd offered kindly to give us £23.5 million as Westminster City Council. We were told today, my leader phoned me just before MQT to say it's been withdrawn because we haven't balloted. We have balloted. Can I ask you to please look at the facts again and reconsider your decision? Church Street, as I'm sure you know, is a very deprived part of London, one of the 10 poorest council wards. It's a Labour ward, by the way, and we want this housing. There's over 892 housings, 50% of them affordable. It's clearly something we can work with together. I know we've had an argument between the council and you recently on other issues, but surely this shouldn't be politics.
Well, Chair, I'm sure this question must be in order because you've allowed it. But let me deal with the let me deal with the question. So you'll be aware, Chair, because we've raised that at previous mayor's question time, that we've been consulting on plans around estate regeneration. Up until now, the mayor has and City Hall, previous administrations have crossed their arms and done nothing about involving local residents in plans to regenerate their estates. Last year I consulted on plans to involve Londoners more on estate regeneration, and the point I made a number of MQTs ago when I announced this was when it comes to money from City Hall being used to regenerate an estate, the expectation was there would be a ballot of residents if you wanted to secure monies from City Halls. And so if it's the case that any council wants to regenerate an estate and they want money from City Hall, they need to make sure they ballot their residents. If it's the case that 4, 5, 6 years ago in a previous scheme, residents were consulted, but it's the case that this scheme is very popular and needed, I'm not sure why a council would be scared to reconsult and to ballot its residents. And I'm surprised that a council that claims to be in tune with her residents is so nervous about balancing residents on plans to regenerate an estate, which in itself begs a number of questions.
I'll leave it there because of time.
Can we please go to the next question, which is from Assembly Member Twycross and relates to EU workers.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question. Recent estimates from the ONS show a sharp fall in net international migration to London, down by more than a quarter between 2016 and 2017. This is the result of both a fall in the number of people coming here from abroad and a large increase in those choosing to either move overseas or return to their home country. At a national level, the ONS have previously identified over 3/4 of fall in net migration is made up by EU citizens. The UK has also seen a large drop in the number of people immigrating here from abroad in order to look for work, especially from the EU. These dramatic shifts, which began after the EU referendum, are influenced by the change in the international perception of the UK as a place welcoming to people from around the world. The fact that large numbers of EU citizens are now either leaving London or not coming here at all is deeply concerning. As evidenced in my submissions to the Migration Advisory Council's review of Brexit's impact on the labour market, people born in the rest of the European Economic Area make up a hugely important part of London's workforce. They account for approximately 750,000 jobs in London's economy and are on average more qualified than their UK counterparts. My London is Open campaign has worked to challenge these negative and misleading perceptions, and I have committed to launch a portal to help Europeans stay in the UK after Brexit. But I've been frustrated by the government's failure to properly support EU citizens. The EU offer of settled status should have been made much earlier and must at the very least be free to those who arrived here before the referendum. I also believe it's misguided for the government not to extend an unconditional offer of settled status to EU citizens currently in the UK, regardless of the outcome of the negotiations. While it is important to ensure UK workers have the training they need to engage fully in the modern economy, immigration from the EU and the rest of the world would always play a vital part in bridging London's skills gap. I'll continue to press the government to do more to reverse this worrying trend in migration and to ensure that post-Brexit immigration system provides the flexibility that London's businesses need.
Thank you. And I noted from my social media feed that actually it's 2 years since you launched the videos around the London is Open campaign, and it's a campaign that's needed even more so today in some ways than it was then. How are you making London an attractive place for EU citizens to come and live and work?
I mean, firstly, what we say and how we conduct ourselves is really important. The impression that some people outside of our country have post-Brexit is we've become inward-looking, insular, which is the very opposite of what we are, open-minded, outward-looking, pluralistic. So it's really important that we espouse our values. We've also got to address the underlying issues why people find it difficult to live in London. I don't apologise for freezing our transport fares and TfL. Some were against that. Some were happy to increase them further. 42% increase in the previous 8 years before I became mayor. Really important we address the issue of people who work hard, get a decent pay's work. You've been an advocate for the London living wage. We need more employers to pay the London living wage. It's really important we address the issue of lack of affordable housing in London. And that's why we're trying to make sure we build more genuinely affordable homes, address the issue of the rental market as well. But, you know, one of the things that you've talked about, we've all talked about, is the consequences of a hostile environment. Mm-hmm. The hostile environment is felt by people who are originally from other parts of the country, not just those in the Windrush generation, but EU citizens see it as well. And how the Home Secretary responds to the fiasco, the shameful saga of Windrush will determine the views of those in the EU as well. It's really important that they understand that.
I'm pleased that you raised the tonal aspects of whether or not people choose to stay or come here in the first place. You'll be aware of the reports that came out overnight about HMIC FRS saying that police forces should improve their response to hate crime and get ready for an upsurge when the UK formally leaves the EU next March. Will you speak to the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police about what specific plans she will have in place to prevent this? And what do you think we can do as politicians representing London, including all the EU citizens and other people from other parts of the world, to make sure that the right tone is set for maintaining that sense that London really is open?
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for your question and the way you asked it. Well, firstly, language matters. It matters. Tone matters. The words you use matters. And it's really important that we realise, as politicians, people look to us for leadership, and we provide positive leadership. And so it's really important we act responsibly. I will raise with the Commissioner the report from the Inspectorate, which came out last night, which was interesting because what the Inspectorate done is looked at examples where there's been spikes, and there has been spikes. Yeah. Some people would deny there's been spikes. There has been spikes in relation to hate crime. But also what they've done, interestingly, is predict, based on past evidence, the possibility of a further increase, which is on the day we leave the European Union. So we now know, based on previous evidence, there's a possibility there could be an increase in hate crimes. So we should do something about that. the most important thing we can do is provide solidarity in the sense of fraternity to those who are feeling scared, who are feeling vulnerable. It's really important they realise we're with them. They could be members of our family, our neighbours, friends, people we work with. And so we're going to let them know we're with them, and we will make sure that we're by their sides. And we're going to make sure that there isn't this increase in hate crime we've seen in the past. It doesn't need to be this way. Just because it's happened in the past doesn't mean in the future there needs to be a spike. And I'm looking to our city to once again be a beacon and show not just the rest of the country but the rest of the world how we don't just tolerate difference, we celebrate, embrace and respect it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question is, Assembly Member Sahota.
Thank you, Chair. Mayor, as we are not attracting people from the EU to come and join us, particularly in the health and social care sector, we are relying upon non-EU countries to provide a skilled workforce to us, particularly like doctors, nurses and teachers. Do you think the government's loosening of the immigration cap for doctors has gone far enough from London's point of view?
So let me just give you a number. The answer is no. 14% of jobs in London are done by those in the EEA outside our country. 40%. 26% are done by those outside the EEA. Now, I'm not saying we mustn't skill up Londoners to have those jobs, but you've got to do both. And the reality is you will be aware of the vacancies in the NHS, including in the medical profession. Now, it takes years to train doctors, and so we can't overnight pull a lever. What's the answer? We've got to make it attractive for experts from overseas, doctors, to come to our country. Simply lifting the cap won't be enough. You know of the resources that have been starved from trust and the inability to make decent job offers. And what's happening? These doctors who are skilled and experienced are going to where? Australia, Canada, New York, New Zealand. We want them to come here.
Yes. And Mr. Mayor, of course, as we celebrate the 70th anniversary of the NHS this year, I'm sure you'll join me in thanking all those who have worked and are working for the NHS, but also to recognise the huge contribution made to the NHS since its inception in 1948 of people who have come to this country, to the shores, and they've added to the NHS, particularly those nurses who came on the Windrush and those doctors who worked in the most deprived areas of London. So hopefully you'll join me in recognise their contribution also to the NHS and who have been the backbone of the NHS since 1948.
Well, Doctor, you were with other Assembly members at the reception upstairs, organised by Unison, to celebrate the 70th birthday of the National Health Service. And the point I made during my short remarks was, it can't be a coincidence that Windrush arrived 70 years ago, and we celebrate 70 years of Windrush, and the NHS is 70 years old, and we celebrate 70 years of the NHS. And, immigration has been a huge benefit to our city and country, economically, socially and culturally, but also the NHS is built on the foundations of immigration from the Commonwealth, including those who came in Windrush. Doctors, nurses, healthcare workers, porters, cleaners, and others who are part of the NHS family, all of them are an integral part of the NHS being the success years, and I look forward to the next period of celebrating the success of the NHS, which means not simply celebrating the workers, making sure they're treated with dignity, but investing in the NHS as well, putting our money where our mouth is.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Now we go to the question on Uber from Assembly Member Eshalomi.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question. I fully supported TfL's decision to refuse Uber a private hire operating licence last September. Those who criticised that decision should note that Uber has now accepted that TfL's decision was entirely justified. When TfL made its decision, Uber was taking a highly lax approach to public safety. The lack of proactive reporting of alleged crimes to the police was extremely alarming, a view also shared by the Met Police. TfL made it crystal clear that safety must be the top of the agenda for all operators. This has now been vindicated by the recent court judgment. At the appeal, the magistrate agreed that Uber was not a fit and proper person to hold a licence at the time of the TfL decision in September. The company's previous approach showed a total disregard for the rules by which everyone in the industry must play. Uber thought they were too big and too powerful to be held to the same standards as everyone else. They were dismissive and misleading, lacking the openness and transparency that is expected in London. As a result of big changes implemented by Uber since TfL's decision, the magistrate concluded that Uber had provided sufficient evidence to the court that it was now a fit and proper person to hold an operating licence. Uber was therefore granted a 15-month licence by the magistrate, shorter than that what they wanted, with a set of stringent conditions that TfL will thoroughly monitor and enforce. They also had to pay all of TfL's legal costs, amounting to £425,000. Uber is now on probation and has been forced to overhaul its culture and ethos. It is actually making changes globally. They have appointed 3 non-exec directors to the Uber London board and introduced new arrangements to ensure that the rules in London are fully observed. Uber has also introduced new systems for the proactive reporting of allegations straight to the police. Uber now has to prove that they have truly changed in order to hold on to their licence. They must demonstrate that they can play by the rules. TfL's original decision and the court's judgment show that in London, works and is an integral part of keeping Londoners safe. As Mayor, I'm working hard to ensure that London continues to be at the forefront of innovation and a natural home for new and exciting companies. But everyone has to play by the rules.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. And I think it is right that the safety of drivers and safety of passengers is paramount, and that TfL took this action. As a result of the ruling, you'll be aware that Uber had to now start reporting any serious crimes directly to the police which involved passengers, rather than the ridiculous situation where victims were actually reporting that crime to the police. Have you had any reassurances from Uber on that, on any way that they'll actually make sure that this works and that they're going to adhere to this?
So you're right. The position before was not tenable, and big concerns from the police as well as TfL and ourselves. So the magistrate laid down a number of stringent conditions, and they include, as you say, proactive reporting to TfL and to the police. These will be regularly checked. I think every 6 months they'll be regularly checked by TfL. TfL, as the regulator, takes her role very seriously, and I've been reassured that TfL will closely monitor Uber's adherence to the conditions and, let me be frank, take appropriate action if the required standards aren't met.
I know that TfL's ruling was solely based on safety, but one of the things that we looked at on the Transport Committee and Labour Group was around the poor working practices for drivers. Some really, really shocking conditions coming through. One of the conditions of the new agreement was that Uber would not circumvent obligations such as medical declarations. Again, are you satisfied that drivers will be tested, and if not, will they be retested?
So this is a really important point. There was a concern about those that had been passed, inverted commas, medically fit, hadn't had a proper examination in person. We heard stories about Skype interviews and all the rest of it. So TfL have identified all the applicants and licensed drivers with whom there were concerns around their medicals, and they've undertaken a new medical with a GP rather than what was being done before by Uber. And Uber understand now, from now onwards, any new driver or those whose license has been renewed must make sure they do proper medicals rather than the ones that were taking place before.
And I think it's good, and I think we'll definitely, on this side, definitely continue to monitor those 14 conditions set by TfL. And I think it's right that any decision to extend their licence should again come back to TfL and the committee.
Well, can I say this? I mean, it's an example where, Chair, if I may, we should be encouraged and proud of London's response. I mean, for too long, cities around the world were scared to take on, to be frank, the big boys and girls. And we showed last September, TfL showed, doing this properly, they made a decision, and we stuck by TfL. And there were others who were saying we made a bad decision. Others were using all sorts of other, theories why we'd taken the decision to stand by TfL. There were concerns about democracies in relation to the relationship with the previous administration and members of a certain political party and Uber. I think we've shown how things should be done, and the rest of the world have taken note and have followed our lead. But also, Uber have changed the way they operate around the world, and the global CEO deserves credit, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Assembly Member Shah, and it's on culture for all Londoners.
Thank you, Chair. Government cuts to local authorities are having a profound effect on arts and culture, with a national fall of £236 million since 2010. London has been one of the hardest hit, with funding levels shrinking by nearly a fifth. Government cuts have also shut down 81 youth clubs and projects in London since 2011, leaving many young people with nowhere to go. However, I've made culture a priority. Through our flagship London Borough of Culture, and we're supporting 5 outer London boroughs with £3 million to help local people take part in and make culture on their doorsteps. This includes £1.35 million each for Waltham Forest and Brent. Through the new Cultural Impact Awards, we're supporting outer London projects with £290,000. For example, in Barking and Dagenham, looked after children will design their own cultural programme. In Kingston, I'm told, Chair, Kingston's the London home of reggae. There will be a brand new music festival. And in Merton, the answer says, you know, I know. I worry that there wasn't proper fact-checking taking place, but I'm told it's the London home of reggae. There will be a brand new music festival, and in Merton, our funding will help address the borough's shortage of cinemas. At the grassroots, we've given over £75,000 to community-led projects through my new £1 million Culture Seeds programme. Almost half of these are in outer London. Nurturing young talent is also crucial. We're supporting young musicians through the London-wide Gigs programme and young music scholars through the London Music Fund. Our 4th Plinth Schools Award this year received almost 4,000 entries from schools in every London borough. Culture is also central in regeneration. We've given £5.9 million of good growth funding to date to cultural projects in outer London boroughs, and through our new cultural enterprise zones, we help young creative people and businesses in outer London put down roots. £330,000 worth of development funding has gone to outer London to help shape new zones, and in Haringey, £650,000 will also be spent on a new skills and training programme. At East Bank, Chair, in the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, we're investing £385 million. This is the most significant single investment in London's culture since the legacy of the 1851 Great Exhibition, which bequeathed us the V&A, the Science Museum and the Natural History Museum. This is just a snapshot of what we're doing to support young people in outer London.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for delivering some great news about what you are doing to enhance culture in outer London boroughs. I'd like to, on that, recommend Region Committee's report, Creative Tensions, which was published last year. And there are 2 specific recommendations. They're numbers 4 and 6 on outer London, which I hope that your draft report on culture will seriously address. Going on hammering home specific issue about safeguarding cultural facilities in outer London, in particular funding for local councils on heritage and museums is a big problem. Outer London boroughs are finding it difficult to sustain those kind of heritage buildings. Is this something that you will look into to see how you can support?
Well, firstly, I've got to be candid. We can't replace, for council, the money that's been lost from central government. We just can't. The numbers. So what we can do is try and help councils. So we are working with some boroughs in relation to culture at risk. We've set up a culture at risk office which works with boroughs. And what I'd suggest, if there are particular examples, if you work with the culture at risk office, it's in Deputy Mayor Justine Simon's team, about specific examples. We've already got examples where the Knights are and Justine have worked with premises which are at risk, but on those examples around heritage, please speak with them and they'll see what they can do. Sometimes it's convening, it's signposting, it's helping, sometimes it's funding, and we'll see what we can do.
I do have an example in Harrow, Local Arts Centre, a fabulous, I think it's grade 1 listed building, which is under threat for a number of years. Something needs to be done, so thanks for that. I will contact the Deputy Mayor. And lastly, but not least, this second facet of my question related to young people. Will you ensure, Mr. Mayor, that your cultural infrastructure plan takes a proactive approach to ensure that more young people have good access to culture, and that the program is developed by engaging with them to see what they aspire?
Absolutely, and the good news is, just so you're aware, that the bids from both Waltham Forest and Brent, who were the successful boroughs in 19 and 20 for the first ever London Borough of Cultures, took on board views of young people in their respective boroughs. It's really crucial that we have young people's views taken on board. It can't be, middle-aged men dictating to young people what their culture should be. We've got to involve them in their views. There could be emerging cultural trends as well.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mayor.
Question on ULEZ is withdrawn. So the next question is on homelessness, and it's from Assembly Member Copley.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question. First, I hope the experience of the new Housing Minister, the 5th since I became Mayor, in the DWP means he fully appreciates the negative impact welfare reform is having on homelessness. Soon after becoming mayor, we set up a new No Night Sleeping Rough task force chaired by James Murray, my Deputy Mayor for Housing. This brings together key partners from boroughs, charities and others who have been working hard to tackle this complex problem. Last year, for the first time in a decade, we saw a fall in the number of people seen sleeping rough in London. But it is still unacceptable that 7,400 people slept rough last year, more than double the number when my predecessor became mayor. We're still at crisis point, and it's our moral responsibility to act. We're now investing £8.5 million a year in core services, an extra £4.2 million we secured from government in 2016, and a further £3.3 million secured in June. This latest money means we can double the number of outreach workers this autumn, boost local winter and emergency shelters, expand No Second Night Out, and fund a specialist mental health team for rough sleepers. But there is still much more to do. We need more resources to help people off the streets, to help prevent rough sleeping, and to offer people...
of course, we all welcome the recent fall we've seen in rough sleeping after many years of it sadly increasing. Of course, looking into those figures, I think a lot of the fall was from EU citizens. There's still been a rise in UK nationals, and I wonder if you could offer a sort of explanation for that, about whether that suggests more structural issues, and set out a bit how some of the very welcome money you've secured from the government is going to help get these people off London streets.
No, you're right. If you do a deep dive into the figures, there's been a reduction in EU rough sleepers. The increase in UK citizens has been less high than in previous years, so we've seen some improvement there as well. But you're right to refer to the long-term structural issues. We know what they are, speaking to those at the coalface, and we're taking steps to address those. So we do need more affordable housing, increased supply. We do need to reform the private rented sector so that it offers secure and affordable long-term tenancies for residents. Also, we need to make sure there's proper mainstream advice and support for those who become rough sleepers. Think of the issues around substance abuse, mental health issues, but also the fourth part of the equation is welfare reforms. I mean, there is a direct link between the government's welfare reform changes and an increase in rough sleeping. You can't run away from that. And what I'm pleased by is a senior civil servant is now looking into that link. The minister, if you remember, denied there had been a link. The good news is the civil servant's looking into the link between benefits and rough sleeping, and we think that might lead to, we're hoping, a change in government policy.
Well, I really hope so, and you bring me on to the issue of universal credit. I visited a drop-in centre recently in a borough which is trialling the rollout of universal credit, and they were saying, you know, they'd suddenly started getting people who weren't actually homeless coming to them for food because they were waiting so long before they first got their first payment and the universal credit. So this is a major, major problem, given the government is continuing to roll this out across London despite all of the warnings, and most recently from the National Audit Office. Have you made any assessment of the impact of the full rollout of universal credit on homelessness in London?
So we had some numbers from the pilots in London which caused concern, and I made representations to the Secretary of State suggesting they delay the rollout until they'd ironed out the problems there were in the pilots. The whole idea of pilots is you pilot it, you see the problems, you iron them out before you roll it out. They decided not to do so. And so we are doing some work in relation to two things. One is we welcome the government's agreement that senior civil servant committed to looking at the connection between benefits and homelessness. But secondly, our own officers are doing some work around scoping, and I'm happy for them to speak with you in relation to how we can do some research about the link between universal credit and rough sleeping, benefit system and rough sleeping. And the obvious example is if there's a big delay and a time lag between you receiving your benefit, it's not surprising, particularly in the private rented sector, if the landlord doesn't want to wait a long period of time and somebody's made homeless. And so it's really important to realise you can prevent this rather than pick up the pieces afterwards. That's why the work James Murray is doing, leading the task force around No First Night Sleeping Rough, is really important. That's working with local authorities, charities and others to stop people becoming rough sleepers in the first place.
Thank you for that answer and for that offer. Thank you.
Next question is from Assembly Member Twycross and relates to the NHS 70 Parliamentary Awards.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to congratulate the two London winners of the NHS 70 Parliamentary Awards, Professor Shafi Ahmed at Barts and Islington GP Federation. I want to thank the extraordinary NHS staff who provide brilliant care to patients and whose hard work and dedication are instrumental in keeping the NHS running during some challenging times. We have a growing population in London and widening differences in people's health depending on whether they are rich or poor. As Mayor, I'm responsible for producing a health inequality strategy to address this problem and galvanising the public, private and voluntary sector to reduce the gap in healthy life expectancy that shamefully exists. People are living longer with multiple health conditions, so we need NHS and social care colleagues to work together in a more joined-up way to make sure that people can be looked after in their communities rather than in hospital. We also need to train and attract more health and care staff to the capital. London has the highest nursing vacancy rates in the country at 14%, making it difficult for hospitals to run services properly. We have world-leading research centres and a thriving technology sector, which we need to promote both in terms of smart use of new technologies to improve patient care and internationally to grow the life science sector. Demand is increasing and people need to be able to access both digital and local NHS community services so that ambulance and accident and emergency staff aren't overwhelmed. On mental health, we want the NHS to work more closely with councils, schools and others to improve young people's ability to access earlier the mental health support they require. We're supporting the Thrive London programme, a citywide movement to improve the mental health and well-being of all Londoners. On children's obesity, we've set up a task force to tackle this as it will affect people's health for decades to come. London needs to have more decision-making powers on how we spend our NHS and social care funding so we can put Londoners' needs at the heart of what we do. That's why I signed a devolution agreement which includes use of NHS assets and estates. And finally, we need a fully funded health settlement and a long-term capital allocation to ensure we have a well-staffed service operating in fit-for-purpose premises to deliver the first-class health and care services that Londoners deserve.
Thank you. You mentioned a whole range of activities and priorities there. I just wanted to talk a little bit about social care in London, which, as you'll be aware, is really struggling to cope with demand and meet the needs of Londoners who most need help. A recent survey by the Local Government Association showed that 9 in 10 of councils say that national taxation has to be part of the solution to securing the long-term financial stability of adult social care. Will you commit to working with London boroughs to ensure that social care is better funded and fit to give Londoners the care they need?
Absolutely. London councils do a tremendous job under terrible circumstances in relation to funding. And just to give you an idea of the scale of the challenge, the LGA, which you referred to, they estimate that councils face a £1 billion funding gap in relation to social care by 2020. 1 billion. Now, you will be aware that councils have faced huge cuts over the last 8 years. And unless we're not careful, basically all that the councils will have funds to fund are statutory services. And so we've talked about youth services, we've talked about rough sleeping. If we're not careful, because of the need in adult social care, that's all they'll be able to do. That's why the government's got to step in. And the phrase used by the chair of the LGA, and by the way, he's a Conservative, was window dressing. When the government says they're going to have a Department for Health and Social Care, he said it's window dressing. Why? Because you can rebrand and change a name, but unless there's resources and a commitment, you're not addressing the issue. That's why it's important we in City Hall support councils who are facing a terrible, terrible time. But actually, the worst time is felt by those who need adult social care and their families who are struggling. And you'll be aware of the knock-on consequence to the NHS in hospitals in relation to people who should be in homes receiving social care who are in hospitals.
Thank you. And you mentioned sort of devolution and additional powers under devolution. Are you confident that you'll get all the powers that you would like to see devolved to yourself and City Hall to sort of make sure we get the best health service in London possible?
No, I'm not confident at all. And by the way, this is a good example where we're not asking for devolution to City Hall, to me, but to London, to the councils. And so what needs to happen is resources and responsibilities. What's happened in the past is responsibilities, no resources. Councils get blamed in relation to social care without the resources. And so we need a combination of both devolution of powers and devolution of resources as well. The devolution we have with the Department of Health in the recent past is a good first step. There's got to be an acceleration of more devolution.
And will you get the level of devolution, do you think, that Greater Manchester has?
We hope so. I mean, Greater Manchester, on paper, appear to have a lot more devolution around health and social care. We'll have to wait and see how it pans out in real terms, whether they've got the resources as well. Our population is far bigger than Manchester's, acute challenges and a greater need for devolution. I believe, though, in a National Health Service. What I don't want is a fragmentation of the National Health Service. What I do think, though, is we in London, same as those in Manchester, who are at the coalface, are better placed to decide how resources are spent, how people are moved, rather than civil servants in Whitehall. But also, we are more joined upness between health and social care, and devolution allows us to do that.
Thank you.
Next question is from Assembly Member Boff and relates to Pride Parade.
Thank you, Chair. I was proud to reinstate the City Hall Pride reception last year after the previous mayor shelved it. Our capital stands as a shining light of diversity to the world, and it's important to me that the LGBT plus community always feels that they have a home in London, and City Hall is the home of London Government. It's important to me to celebrate the capital's LGBT plus community, and I'm happy to say it was a hugely successful event this year and last year. I'm determined that the newly restored reception at City Hall will be an important yet enjoyable addition to Pride Week celebrations. I don't personally control the guest list for the event, so I can't give you specifics on who and why people were invited. I understand that 492 people were invited to the reception, and this year City Hall have tried to broaden our engagement with the LGBT plus community. For example, City Hall invited the board of UK Black Pride following the work we've been doing, not previously done by City Hall, to support this important event.
Mr Mayor, it's unusual that Peter Tatchell wasn't invited, bearing in mind he is a patron of the Pride Trust. Would it have anything to do, his lack of an invitation, have anything to do with the fact that at the previous Pride reception, he challenged you over why you'd imposed a 26,000 limit on the numbers who could march in Pride. And this year that meant that 20,000 people were unable to march at Pride. Could it be that he challenged you and therefore was cut out of any future receptions?
I'm sure it wasn't. I mean, as I said, those who sorted out the invitation list, I'm sure that wasn't the reason. I'm not sure what the reason was, what the criteria is. What I do know is that Peter Tatchell is a formidable campaigner who's...
Did you, Mr Mayor, have notice of this question?
Yeah, I saw it.
Okay. What inquiries did you make with your team to inquire why he wasn't invited?
I asked how the invitation list was done, and I was told it's done by City Hall staff, and they try to broaden those who are invited.
So so what is the answer to the question? Why wasn't Peter Tatchell invited?
Well, I'm not in charge of the invitation list.
Well, you are actually, Mr Mayor, because you're the Mayor of bloody London, and you are in charge of it.
Can I just say...
And so you are in charge of it. Now, why wasn't Peter Tatchell invited?
Well, can I just tell you, Chair, that the idea that I or any previous mayor would be in charge of an invitation list is ludicrous. It shows the reason
Mr Mayor,
why...
you were given notice of this question. You would have notice of this question. You could ask your team what the answer was, but you don't seem to have done that. Why is that, Mr Mayor?
Chair, we can ask a number of questions about why X wasn't invited, why Y wasn't invited, why Z wasn't invited. There are examples...
I'm not asking about X, Y or Z. I'm asking about Peter Tatchell.
There are examples of, I suspect, lots of people in the LGBT plus community who would have liked to be invited and may not have been. What I can say is I've got no problems with Peter Tatchell. He's somebody that I respect hugely. Over the last 3-4 decades, he has been a formidable campaigner, not simply for LGBT plus rights, but for others as well. Many of the campaigns that I've been involved in on other issues have involved Peter Tatchell's involvement. He's somebody who is a Londoner who we should be proud of.
Very good.
And the suggestion...
Will you answer his question, therefore?
And the suggestion...
Will you answer the question he gave to you at the last Pride reception, that he wants to answer from you as to why Pride was artificially limited, and that meant that 20,000 people couldn't march this year? Will you at least answer that question to him? Not now, but in writing, perhaps.
Well, Pride in London, Chair, is a fantastic event. It's a fantastic celebration of our diversity.
It's super. I know. I was there. I got terrible sunburn. And we know about that. Mr Mayor, will you answer his question? Will you write to Peter Tatchell and answer why you limited the numbers on Pride?
Well, Chair, let me ask the question now. I've placed no limitations on the numbers of people who celebrate
Pride.
Chair, I mean,
that's all I'm asking is he can say yes or he will.
The mayor's answered the question. He said it wasn't anything to do with him. If he wants to write a letter to Mr. Tatchell, that's a matter for the mayor.
That's a matter for the mayor. Okay, finally, just to finish this off, Mr. Mayor. So Peter Tatchell asked a question at the Pride reception, and he's cut out and excluded from the next one. Margaret Hodge raises the issue of anti-Semitism with Jeremy Corbyn, and she gets disciplinary action taken against her. Freedom of speech seems to be under attack in the Labour Party. How will this intolerance to criticism,
Chair,
Mr. Mayor, affect the remainder of your mayoralty?
Chair, can I just suggest this is one of the reasons why he never wins elections?
Yeah.
Is that your answer, Mr. Mayor? These are important issues
Yes,
about
these are,
public engagement,
I'm sorry,
about anti-Semitism, and you throw a joke.
No, Mr. Boff. These are important questions, but it's not a matter for the mayor to comment on why a member of Parliament isn't invited or has not access to her own political party. That cannot possibly be in the mayor's remit.
Chair, can I suggest that maybe some Assembly members may benefit from guidance from you about questions that are in order and aren't in order before the next Mayor's question time?
Yeah. Well, indeed. But, Mr. Mayor, you've shown your competence at dealing with these things without any intervention from me, so I give you enough rope before intervening. The next question also comes from Mr. Boff, and it relates to overcrowding. And he's out of time.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear.
Okie doke. So, next question is from Assembly Member Cooper. Assembly Member Cooper.
That's not very
and it relates to Car Free Day.
Thank you, Chair. The central aim of my transport strategy is for 80% of all trips to be made on foot, by cycle, or using public transport by 2041. TfL is implementing my vision for London streets with £2.2 billion allocated to a healthy streets portfolio to create greener, safer and more welcoming streets that enable Londoners to walk, cycle and use public transport. Together with major improvements to the public transport network, we will support London's growth, reduce reliance on cars and help clean up London's dangerously polluted air. Car-free events are great opportunities to inspire change by letting people experience the city from a different perspective. We know closures can result in local improvements in air quality. Although TfL are only responsible for 5% of the roads in London, they work throughout the year to support car-free events. This year we're supporting over 100 planned street closures, ranging from high-profile events such as Pride and New Year's Eve fireworks to local and cultural events like the Versace processions and the Ealing Half Marathon. Ride London this year will see over 70,000 participants cycle the car-free streets of London. TfL's research following this event in previous year proves over half of these people continue cycling more all year round. The 22nd of September is World Car-Free Day. Last year, TfL marked World Car-Free Day by working with over 100 schools in 18 boroughs and encouraging parents and carers to substitute car journeys to school with walking or cycling. Schools set up car-free zones near their school gates, park and stride spots and walking buses. These activities have continued in 2018. This year we're offering support to boroughs that are organising local car-free events, and TfL is working with charity London Play to coordinate existing Play Street events which will involve local road closures as a series of events to coincide with Car-Free Day. TfL is also working with World Car-Free Day organisers to coordinate marketing activities and social media. I encourage boroughs to work with TfL and London Play on making this day a huge success, and I've asked TfL to consider how we can do even more to support this in 2019.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, you've mentioned previously how it manifested itself with a number of schools and a number of boroughs. Are we actually going to be able to get all the boroughs on board for the 22nd of September this year? Because obviously, as you say, with TfL only controlling such a small percentage of the roads, and I think it would be really fantastic if we could have a real pledge from all of the boroughs, obviously organisations like Living Streets and the London and local cycling campaigns, all saying that this is going to be a real focus on the same day. Is that possible?
I think we can understand why the major arterial roads, we've got to make sure they're running and they work properly, but good councils should be looking at what streets they can have car-free for the day. Residential streets, particularly schools in and around schools. really important thing about having car-free. And the great thing is, I think parents will realise you can survive without dropping off a child to school if you're using a car to school, and then make it walking or cycling or going on a scooter from home to boroughs to work with their schools. But also people power. Parents, carers, teachers should be lobbying their boroughs to think about doing events around the 22nd of September, but also that week as well. We can do lots of things.
Well, I hope that's something that other Assembly members will be taking back to their boroughs and across London to encourage schools and the boroughs to get involved. Is that something that TfL has been able to discuss with London councils and the Tech Committee to try and encourage them to come on board for this?
We have. So the chair of that committee, Julian Bell, the leader of Ealing, is a passionate cycler, as you know, and he understands the importance of addressing this issue. And so Heidi has already met with Julian and the team there. We will carry on talking to London councils. It's a good example of partnership. By the way, it's not party political. There are some very good examples from Conservative councils, Labour councils, Lib Dem councils. It's not just an inner, outer. All councils have a role to play and can really make this day a special day.
I think there is one issue we do need to take into consideration, which has been raised with me when we've had things like the Prudential bike ride, and that's people who have access needs and blue badge holders. How can we make sure that they're able to still continue their lives when obviously they have some different requirements because of their particular physical needs?
This is a good example why we would encourage residents mustn't just put up bollards and close the road off, because there's often a very important reason why the road needs to be entered. So it could be done in cooperation and partnership with a council. So some of the things that we are doing is making sure when it comes to busy areas that the bus routes that are diverted, there's better communication. We talked before about better communication with residents. We've got to make sure those with accessibility issues can access streets. And so we've got to make sure we take on board those who need to use their cars for essential reasons are able to get about when there are car-free days in parts of London.
And finally, Mr Mayor, do you think there's any lessons that we can learn from what Anne Hidalgo has been managing to do in Paris that perhaps might be worth drawing to the attention of Westminster Council in relation to Oxford Street?
Well, I think the amount of roads that Anne closed off in Paris is quite small, but it had a huge impact. And it shows the difference strong, bold leadership can make. A good example of a leader doing right by their community, compare and contrast with Westminster. They're not simply letting down residents and businesses and London, but I worry the UK economy could suffer because of the stance taken, the short-sighted stance taken by the council.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think it's a difficult area, and I appreciate that you've been pushing forward on this because we really do need to clean up London's air, and I think we need to take these positive chances to make road closure something, car-free days, something that we can really celebrate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I wonder if members would agree, please, to extend the meeting to deal with the remaining questions.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Berry will ask about police raids and the Notting Hill Carnival.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question. The Met run complex operations informed by intelligence to keep the public safe every single day. This includes proactively ahead of large events to minimise the risk for all attendees. For obvious reasons, I'm not able to provide detail on the exact nature of these operations. Pre-event crime arrest activity is a legitimate and viable tactic utilised by the MPS in order to meet its priorities of preventing and detecting crime, protecting life and property and maintaining the peace. I'm happy to refer to events already in the public domain, Chair. The 2011 Royal Wedding and the 2013 G8 Conference are examples of where the Met has undertaken pre-event crime arrest activity. On Notting Hill Carnival specifically, the ambition is to make sure events take place successfully and safely. Carnival is one of the most important events on our cultural calendar, and it's a fantastic celebration of the capital's diversity and vibrant history. Last year's Carnival, thanks to the hard work of our strategic partners, was safer than previous years, and we must continue to work together to maintain this direction of travel. Carnival is a truly unique event. The police are working incredibly hard to further reduce risk and improve safety and security at this year's event. I regularly discuss Carnival with the Met, and on Tuesday I met with the Commissioner who provided me with an update on operational planning for Carnival. As you'll appreciate, given recent increases in serious violent crime and the continuing threat of terrorism, the landscape of planning for Carnival this year will be slightly different to previous years. The new Violent Crime Task Force plays a pivotal role in operational activity to reduce violence across London. The Commissioner has confirmed that operational activity in advance of the event and during the event will be informed by current intelligence and will be proportionate to the risk posed to the safety of the public. We must all send a clear message to the small minority who plan to commit violence that will simply not be tolerated. For operational reasons, I can't discuss the detail of the Met's plan for Carnival today. However, the Gold Commander for Carnival is happy to separately brief the Police and Crime Committee on plans as he did last year.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, first of all, thank you for the strong support that you gave to Carnival there. I think the whole Assembly, the local councils, Police and Crime Committee, we've all fully supported the continuation of Carnival in its current form without ticketing, moving it, changing the days. I'm also pleased to hear that this year the facial recognition technology that was used over the past 2 years at Carnival won't be used again this year. I think that's really good. But last year, many members of the public, particularly on social media, including artists like Stormzy, complained that the heavily publicised police raids conducted across London in places such as Catford were being unfairly linked to the Notting Hill Carnival. So what do you say to black Londoners, people from groups who take part in Carnival, who say these policing activities being labelled as pre-Carnival raids is a slur on their community and their cultural events?
Well, I'm not going to talk about specific operations. What I can say is nothing could be further from the truth. Last year, the Minister for London made representations to move Carnival, and I was quite clear in my mind. Those of us who know the history of Carnival, and I had the pleasure of meeting on the day of celebrations here. They organised, and Janet Arnold was there as well, the Windrush generation, who talked about the history of Carnival and why we have Carnival. And so I'm quite clear in my mind the importance of Carnival. It's important, though, if the police have intelligence of somebody about to commit a criminal act or somebody involved in criminality, they've got to act on that. If we know there are people, and it's a small minority, determined to use Carnival as an opportunity to commit crime, the police have to act on that. And the reality is this: the vast majority of people who go to Carnival, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, go for good reasons to celebrate Carnival. There is a small minority who go to commit acts of criminality, and that's a fact. And we would be criticising the police if they weren't acting on that intelligence. And so the police must act on intelligence, but nobody should label an entire community, and nobody is.
Yeah, so the worry is about the labelling, really. I mean, the raids, they may need to be carried out. We've seen the task force, they carry out raids daily when operationally needed. But it's the publicity that seems to worry me. These raids are not just carried out, they're heavily publicised and linked to the Carnival. So don't you agree this pushes a negative image of Carnival rather than what should be a positive one? It's a great event. It generates tens of millions for London's economy every year.
Well, I mean, I deliberately gave 2 examples in the public domain where the police have undertaken pre-event raids. The royal wedding, nobody was suggesting, I'm sure, that William or Kate are criminals, even though there were pre-event raids before their wedding. Similarly, in 2013, the G8 royal leaders, nobody suggested they were criminals. Nobody should suggest that the vast majority of those who go to Carnival are criminals. But there is a small number, a very small number, who go along to commit acts of criminality, and I support the police in taking action against those. What's clear, though, is nobody should make sweeping generalisations about an entire community.
Yeah, or of particular events. That's, I think, I mean, I'm running out of time, but I hope you'll encourage the Met to think about the perception of Carnival when doing press releases. I know you don't get involved in operational matters, but publicity, I think you can have an influence on.
Well, I will, but can I just say this as well, Chair, which is really important. Many of us enjoy Carnival, including police officers, but it is a challenging day for the police. And, I don't apologise for making this point. It's a great day. We all have a great day. The police work incredibly hard. Often it's really hot, and they're wearing lots of gear. And, they have my huge gratitude for making sure Carnival is as safe as it can be.
Okay, thank you very much. Assembly Member Curtin will ask a question on President Trump's visit.
Thank you, Chair. The UK, like the USA, has a long and rich history of the right and the freedom to protest, and the freedom of speech and the freedom to assemble. I've always supported the right to peaceful protest and understand that this can take many different forms. Parliament Square is a site used for protest on all kinds of issues across the centuries. It is an important assembly point at the heart of our democracy. The city operations team at the GLA, as is usual procedure, met with the organisers of this protest and gave them permission to use Parliament Square Garden as a grounding point for the blimp. The city operations team at the GLA have the power to approve use of the gardens as long as a number of criteria are met, such as liability insurance alongside a full health and safety risk assessment by the GLA's independent consultants. I was not involved in the decision at all. It was made by the city operations team at the GLA. The organisers also had to separately seek the necessary approvals from the Met Police and the National Air Traffic Service, which they did. It is important to realise it is not the Mayor's or the GLA's role to act as a censor or the arbiter of what is or isn't a good protest. It is the GLA's job to assess whether it can be done safely, legally and peacefully. My main priority is the safety of all Londoners and visitors to our city, and as always, I'm working closely with the Met Police and other key agencies to ensure all protests are carried out safely and securely.
Well, Mr. Mayor, you seem to trying to rebrand yourself as a champion of free speech, but in the 2 years that you've been mayor, you've introduced new guidelines in TfL advertising which will ban an advertisement like that of Protein World, which simply has on it a picture of a woman in a bikini. And you've introduced guidelines to TfL staff to ban them from using the highly offensive phrase, ladies and gentlemen. And you've also introduced new guidance to TfL staff to stop them from commemorating historical British events like the Battle of Rorke's Drift, which of course was immortalised by Michael Caine in the film Zulu. And when I asked you about that in May, you said that the staff at Dollis Hill were ill-judged, simply to say, on this day in history, the Battle of Rorke's Drift happened. So the idea that you're against censorship is brazenly ridiculous, isn't it, Mr. Mayor?
Let me deal with each of those points in turn, Chair. So I'm surprised you don't realise this, but the freedom to protest and the freedom of speech is a bit different from advertising on the underground. But even the right to free protest has limitations. So, for example, if there are concerns around national security, your right to free speech can be limited. If, for example, there is issues around child pornography, inverted commas, your limitations are there for free speech. For example, if the laws of defamation are breached, there are limitations on free speech. I'm really happy to give you a tutelage on free speech.
I don't think I need any tutelage from you, Mr.
Article 10 of... Article 10... Well, you asked the question. Article 10 of the Human Rights Act is quite clear about the limitations on free speech. The US Convention, which you claim to know well, the first article talks about the importance of free speech and why it's important. So I'm surprised as somebody who claims to be an expert on free speech, you aren't aware in certain circumstances it's right and proper. In a democracy, we have curtailment. So, for example, you couldn't go into a cinema, a busy cinema, and shout the word fire. It's a limitation on your free speech because of what it would lead to. And it would lead to mass panic,
Mr. Mayor,
and lead to all sorts of issues. That's why it's really important.
You're very good at dodging the question that I put to you beforehand, which was about what's happened on TfL. Will you allow TfL staff to use the phrase ladies and gentlemen in future?
Well, what's really important is to understand the context of the protest in Parliament Square and why there was the protest in Parliament Square. It seems to me that you're conflating a number of different issues. The right to protest, which I think 250,000 people expressed on Friday, and the limitations you want to bring upon them because of hurt feelings to somebody you idolise. Now, I don't mind you idolising him. What's important, though, is to realise that we must ensure that British citizens and others can express their right to protest.
Mr. Mayor, you used the word idolise. I mean, certainly that's a childish word, Mr. Mayor. But
what word would you use?
Obviously, President Trump is on course to be one of the greatest presidents. He has successfully done a I mean, as you would admit, Mr. Mayor, he successfully improve relations with North Korea in a way that no other president or head of state could ever imagine. But this blimp that you've allowed to fly in London, it is the most grotesque insult to a sitting president of the United States in history. It would be inconceivable that a mayor of an American city such as New York or Washington would allow such a balloon or blimp to fly of our head of state. And if that happens, we would rightly say that this is an insult not just to the head of state, but the whole country. Will you admit, Mr. Mayor, that this is a gross insult to the President of the United States, and it brings shame and embarrassment upon our city?
Time is up. We will never know what the Mayor thinks about that.
Chair, I think you can guess.
I can guess. The next question is from Assembly Member McCartney and relates to toilet charging.
That was a very smart segue, Chair. Public toilets are a vital facility both for Londoners and visitors to the city. They're especially important for those with disabilities, older people, people with babies and young children, pregnant women, as well as tourists and visitors who may be less familiar with their surroundings. In my draft New London plan, we have put in place steps to ensure more free public toilets are made available to Londoners across the capital. As part of this, I'll be working closely with TfL to see what more can be done to provide clean, safe and accessible toilets on the transport network. You are correct that while most public toilets across the TfL network are free, there are some locations where there is a small charge for use. Generally, this is at locations where the toilet is located on the unpaid side of the ticket gates and are available for anyone to use. The small charge was originally brought in as a deterrent to antisocial behaviour and to contribute towards repairs and maintenance, as damage to facilities can put toilets out of use for extended periods, while costly repairs take place. TfL wants to be able to provide clean, safe and accessible toilets on the transport network. That's why TfL is reviewing charging as part of an overall review of toilet facilities. The review is looking at other ways to prevent a small minority of people from damaging toilets and will draw upon Network Rail's experience. Adequate and cost-effective deterrents for antisocial behaviour need to be identified. I know that the team at TfL undertaking the review would welcome any input from the Assembly.
Thank you, and I'm very glad that TfL are undertaking a review. I mean, two of those toilets are in my constituency, Enfield and Haringey, at Cockfosters and Oakwood, and these 15 toilets, the majority of them are actually within the curtilage of the station. So, but can I just gather from what you've said that if those fears about vandalism can be overcome, the principle is that they should be free? That's correct, and also to learn what we can from the Network Rail experience as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the final question is from Assembly Member Copley and relates to the Garden Bridge Trust.
When I was elected Mayor, roughly £37 million of public money had been given to the Garden Bridge Trust under direction by the previous Mayor. I was clear straight away that I was not going to spend more of London's taxpayers' money at the project. And I've stuck to that commitment. No grant payments have been made to the Garden Bridge Trust since May 2016. They have not received any money from TfL since I was elected. Instead, what I've done over the last 2 years is commission a thorough review, respond to the review recommendations by strengthening TfL's board and its processes, and shine a light on areas in need of more transparency. It is through my intervention that TfL has extracted and it published more detail about the money the Garden Bridge Trust has spent on the project, as well as the minutes of the Trust Board meetings that show how the project was managed. This additional information helped me to decide in April last year that signing up the GLA to guarantee the lifetime costs of the bridge's maintenance and operation was a serious financial risk and not one I could take while maintaining my commitment to not spend any more of London taxpayers' money on the project. The Garden Bridge Trust is now winding up its affairs following its decision to end the project. Last year, the government agreed to provide the Trust with an underwriting of up to £9 million of their potential cancellation costs, despite the Permanent Secretary formally advising against this. This was the government's choice. I declined to provide this support, and this both allowed the project to continue for longer and increase the final bill for the taxpayer. As administrators of the public sector project funding, TfL has been in discussions with the Garden Bridge Trust about the detail of any claim against the government's underwriting, and I've been clear that I expect to see full transparency from the Trust before any final settlement, any final payment should be made.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Mayor, and particularly for the last thing that you said about full transparency, because in August last year, the chair of the Garden Bridge Trust, Lord Davies, wrote to you and said, on the subject of where the money has gone, we will of course account for every line of expenditure as part of the winding up operation. Are you still expecting to get a line-by-line account of the Garden Bridge Trust expenditure?
I am. We need to see full transparency. And, you know, you'll remember that the government's asked us to deal with the Garden Bridge Trust in relation to the final part of the monies that they want and stuff. We'll make sure we get full transparency.
So sorry, the government's asked
the government's asked us to be the person that negotiates, deals with the Garden Bridge Trust in relation to the £9 million of additional money that they agreed upon. And we're quite clear we want to see transparency from the Garden Bridge Trust before these monies are handed over.
And that means once you've got those details, that they will be published and the public will also be able to see.
They should be, yeah. I can't see a good reason why they wouldn't be.
Excellent. And are you aware, do you know at this stage, is there any hope of Transport for London and the taxpayer getting back any of the money which has been wasted on this project?
No, the bad news is the money authorised under direction by the previous mayor has been spent, and there is no chance we can get the money back that's been spent. But obviously, if Parliament wants to look into these issues, so far Parliament hasn't. We'd assist them in relation to any inquiry they want to have on this.
Do you think that Parliament should be looking into these issues, given the level of loss of money to the taxpayer?
Well, you'll be aware previously, City Hall's done a lot of work in relation to the work the committee's done, the work Heathrow has done, the review undertaken by Margaret Hodge. You'll be aware central government authorised a considerable amount of money as recently as last year against the advice of the Permanent Secretary. So if the Public Accounts Committee or the NAO was to look into this, we'd provide all the assistance that they wanted.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chair.
That's the end of question time. I hope you have a peaceful break.
Thank you, Chair.
Can we now please move on to the motion set out in my name that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked?
Noted.
All right, thank you very much. Now I rise to put a motion myself. This motion is very simple and very brief. The Assembly is nothing unless it stands up for the health of Londoners. For as long as I've been involved in London government, stretching back to the days of the GLC, London government has been opposed to the expansion of Heathrow. We have been opposed to the expansion of Heathrow because we believe that it will not add to the health of Londoners. Indeed, it will act against them. And it is for that reason, I think, that opposition to the expansion of Heathrow has been cross-party and has been uncontroversial amongst members. We have heard today what the Mayor is proposing to do to thwart the expansion of Heathrow. It's up to us not only to hold the Mayor to see that he does do those things, but it's also up to us to do what we can to defeat, if I can put it this way, the dragon of Heathrow expansion. And I suggest that the way to do it, as set out in this motion, is that every committee, and I include in that, which is the amendment, including the Economy Committee, should have as a matter of course on each agenda an item saying how any matter on that agenda can help stop the expansion of Heathrow. The people who run Heathrow, the people who are advocating the expansion of Heathrow, really have been very arrogant over the years. They have always assumed that it's going to happen. They have ignored the London boroughs, and up until now they have ignored us. It's for us now to show that we cannot be ignored, that we're not entirely toothless, and we shall do whatever we can to thwart this expansion, which is not good for Londoners. I move the amended motion. Thank you very much.
Chair, thank you. I'm very happy to support your motion, and on an issue that is critical not only for your constituency, but for Londoners across the capital who would experience the negative impact of a third runway at Heathrow Airport. Colleagues, we know that political action and memory is often short-term, but thankfully not on this issue. I'd just like to remind you of a couple of points. As the Assembly has held a clear cross-party position for a number of years in opposing Heathrow expansion, and we have made a huge contribution in highlighting its negative effects. We have provided detailed research to make the case against a third runway and voice the concerns of many of our constituents who will be adversely affected by the plans. For example, experts tell us that currently over 700,000 people are affected by noise from Heathrow, with an estimated 200,000 more people affected if the third runway is built. The Assembly's work stretches back to 2012 in a report by the Environment Committee which looked at the air and noise pollution related to surface transport around the airport. This was followed by an excellent report by Transport Committee, chaired by a colleague, Assembly Member Caroline Pigeon, which was an in-depth investigation involving airlines, environmentalists and business leaders. I remember well the day we spent with the experts and specialists at the National Air Traffic Service at Swanwick in Hampshire. It was, my friend here, Mr. Copley says it was good, so it must be good. And can you tweet that? Because nothing...
I'm live tweeting you, Jeanette.
Nothing is real unless Mr. Copley has tweeted it. Our reports and research have been used in support letters, consultation responses and motions, the most recent of which was agreed last month against the third runway. Our cross-party consensus, this is a rare one, crosses over mayoral administrations. And so, as we've heard today, and as my colleague has just said, we should applaud Mayor Khan, who has confirmed that he has triggered the process that will enable him, along with the 5 local boroughs, to set about a legal action against a third runway at Heathrow Airport. I am personally fully behind this legal challenge and agree with Mayor Khan when he says, what we want is a better Heathrow, not a bigger Heathrow. In summary, our previous and current work on this important issue places the Assembly at the centre of the fight against the third runway, a fight we must continue and win. That's why it's vital we approach this from all angles, and that's why this motion is just so timely. And I would ask us all to show support for this motion so that this work can be added to be added as a standing item to the agenda of all the communities referred to in this motion. I formally second this motion. Thank you.
Anybody else want to speak on this? Those in favour, please show. Unanimous. Thank you very much. Can we now please move to item 7, which is the pay award for GLA statutory officers. And I repeat that we have a dispensation which permits us to vote on this. So can I ask you please, and I will read each one of these out, noting that it is a joint decision with the Mayor to agree that a pay award of 2% be made to the Head of Paid Service and the Executive Director of Resources as statutory officers.
Agreed.
To note that the substantive pay of the monitoring officer is settled through the staff pay award.
Agreed.
And to note that in accordance with the Senior Salaries Review Body, made and agreed in 2009, the local government pay settlement of 2% for 2018-19 will be applied to the pay of the Mayor and Assembly members.
Agreed.
Thank you. Right. Item 8, can I simply ask you please to agree the changes which are set out in the agenda?
We agree.
Thank you very much. Will you please, under item 9, agree the revised terms of reference for the Fire Resilience and Emergency Planning Committee?
Agreed.
Thank you. Please note under item 10 that our meeting on the 6th of September will require the attendance of Sir Peter Hendy and Lynn Garner. Will you agree that? Thank you very much. Will you? Yes, you're being asked to agree to summons them to come. I'm hard put to think they won't, but there you are. Can I also ask the Assembly to provisionally agree to hold an additional plenary meeting on Monday the 3rd of September at 2 p.m, principally to hold a question and answer session with the Mayor of London regarding his draft health inequalities strategy, subject to its finalisation.
Agreed.
Thank you. Will you please agree the proposed delegation of authority to me, which is on item 11?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Date of the next meeting? Well, it's going to be, since we've now agreed it, on the 3rd of September here in the chamber.
Agreed.
Can I please ask you to note that there is a briefing for members from Leah Kreitzman, Mayoral Director for External and International Affairs, in Committee Room 2 at 1 p.m. And can I wish you all a happy holiday, much briefer than it normally would have been.
Thank you.
GLA, Chamber, Sound. GLA.